LoveLore Library. Chapter 149. Toasts were exchanged and singing and dancing were celebrated. Mr. Fong had told them about the banquet described by Yaoji. Jiang Huiqing looked around and found that the scene was exactly the same as what Mr. Fong had told them. Was this also the place where Yaoji danced? Jiang Huiqing lowered his eyes, concealing the deep thoughts in his eyes. Qingyu had always played the role of someone who didn't know much about business. Indeed, he didn't know much about it. During the banquet, Qingyu was mainly responsible for communicating with Mr. Sun and others. He listened on the side and occasionally made a puzzled expression. Qingyu would stop and explain to him. What he mainly did was to record everything that happened at the banquet and observe the people who appeared at the banquet. After returning, he would exchange the clues with Qingyu. Under normal circumstances, there weren't many people who would take the initiative to talk to him. Occasionally, there were people who wanted to find another way to get close to Qingyu through him. For these people, Jiang Huiqing didn't seem to know their real purpose at all. After a conversation, he didn't make any promises to them and didn't leave any evidence behind. This was the last test between the two sides. Qingyu acted as usual and was recommended by Mr. Sunday. The other people didn't have much hostility toward him. After the banquet, Qingyu planned to leave with Jiang Huiqing but was stopped by Mr. Sunday. "It's late. Why don't you stay for the night? It'll save you the trouble of making another trip tomorrow." "Is it also here tomorrow?" Qingyu raised his eyebrows. "Ha ha ha, yes." Mr. Sun laughed dryly. "It's a last-minute decision. They'll send someone here tomorrow. Mr. Gu's goods are ready. You can send them here directly." Qingyu looked at him with a faint smile. "Mr. Sun, you've been planning this for a long time. I won't blame you if you tell me directly. It's really a last-minute decision. They're in a hurry. The original date is a little late for them." Mr. Sun explained with a smile. Qingyu was the only one who had what they urgently needed. He could not afford to offend him now. He was not surprised that Qingyu would be angry. Businessmen valued integrity the most. This time, he was the one who broke his promise first. "All right, then I'll stay here for one more day. Find someone to take my letter and tell them to send the goods over tomorrow." The two of them were arranged to stay in the same room. This time, they didn't force any servants to serve them. Boss Sun apologized again and again before leaving with them. After confirming that there was no one around, Jiang Huiqing relaxed and sat on the bed. "Fortunately, I didn't choose today. Originally, after discussing with Lord Fong, they had planned to capture him today. Later, they changed their minds and wanted to do it on the official day of the transaction." Qingyu walked over and sat next to him. "Especially at this kind of time, the more vigilant we should be. If we really choose today, we will only alert the enemy. After all, their real target was not these businessmen, but the people of the northern desert who were hiding behind them." Jiang Huiqing lowered his voice and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Maybe Mr. Sun did it on purpose. The date they chose from the beginning was tomorrow. The date they told us was just to divert attention. If there's really something wrong with us, they won't lose too much." "I think so too. Keeping us here is also a kind of surveillance in disguise. We only have a few servants with us. These people are probably under strict surveillance. They won't be given a chance to spread news to the outside world. They have a good plan. However, Brother Qingyu, aren't you worried that they only want to do one business?" Qingyu understood the meaning of his words and shook his head. "No, they just want to make sure that there's nothing wrong with us. Even if there is a problem, they can retreat safely. If they want to get rid of us after getting the goods, they don't need to test us again and again." It was not good to talk too much in someone else's territory. He Qingyu stopped Jiang Huiqing from continuing the topic and asked for hot water from the servant outside the room. It was a dreamless night. The next day, it was obvious that the courtyard was more heavily guarded. He Qingyu took Jiang Huiqing to the main hall. Mr. Sun was already there and was talking to a burly man. Mr. Gu is here. Mr. Sun glanced at the two of them and stopped talking to the man. He walked towards the two of them and introduced them to each other. This is Mr. Tu, who is going to make a deal with us this time. Mr. Tu doesn't look like someone from Subei. After a simple greeting, He Qingyu said casually. Indeed, he's not. He just has a good friendship with me. Mr. Sun didn't mean to hide it. But in my opinion, it doesn't matter where he's from as long as we can cooperate in a friendly manner. What do you think, Mr. Gu? Mr. Sun is right. After a while, the other bosses also came in. He Qingyu finished the tea in the cup and said, because the goods are special, I need to talk face to face with someone on your side. This request isn't too much, right? It's not too much. Mr. Sun was afraid that the atmosphere would be too stiff, so he tried to smooth things over. Don't worry, Mr. Gu. Mr. Tu is the person on the other side. After spending some time together, Mr. Sun had a certain understanding of He Qingyu. He knew that although he looked easygoing, he was actually very ambitious. It was normal for him to be ambitious since he was able to do such a big business at such a young age. Mr. Sun didn't care about this flaw. In Mr. Sun's ears, He Qingyu's words were to confirm whether the person he was talking to was qualified or not. Sure enough, Mr. Sun saw Mr. Gu's attitude soften. It's fate that brought us together. Let me give you a toast. Mr. Tu stood up and finished the wine in his cup in one gulp. The two of them didn't waste too much time on meaningless conversation. Soon, the topic was on the right track. A batch of the goods Mr. Tu wants has been delivered. If you're in a hurry, you can check it first. He Qingyu went straight to the point. Mr. Tu couldn't ask for more and immediately agreed. The goods were placed neatly in the courtyard. Mr. Tu opened the box with his men and the snow-white salt came into view. He reached out and grabbed a handful. Fine white particles fell through the gaps between his fingers. He Qingyu waved his fan and walked over. How is it? I dare say that no one can get a finished product like mine. It was also the first time Mr. Sun saw such white salt. The shock in his eyes couldn't be hidden. Mr. Tu looked at the other boxes. Without exception, the quality of the goods inside was beyond his expectations. He gave Mr. Sun a look. Mr. Sun understood that it meant that he was very satisfied. The smile on his face kept widening. Mr. Gu really gave us a big surprise. There's no hurry. He Qingyu closed his fan. With this kind of quality, you should be qualified to meet the real boss, right? Of course. A slightly rough voice came from behind. He Qingyu turned around and saw a man wearing Northern Desert uniform walking over from the corridor. There were several guards behind him. Mr. Tu saw him and bowed respectfully. This man had a strong murderous aura. It was more appropriate to call him a soldier than a businessman. From the respectful attitude of Mr. Sun and the others, this man had a very high status. Many thoughts flashed through his mind, but he didn't show it on his face. On the other side, the Northern Army and the hidden dragon guards approached the house bit by bit according to the clues provided by Fang Jun. The people in the house didn't realize that danger was approaching. They were immersed in the joy of the transaction. Only He Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing remained clear-headed. Not to mention the others, even Jiang Huiqing was surprised when he saw the boxes being opened. In order to fish out the mastermind, He Qingyu really put in a lot of effort. After he took out those items, everyone present looked at He Qingyu in a different light. Jiang Huiqing felt the constant gazes directed at him and felt a little amused. Yesterday, they were all putting on airs, but today, they couldn't wait to climb on top of him. The negotiation went smoothly. Before the final deal was finalized, Qingyu put down his cup and said, "May I ask where these things will be used in the end? Since Mr. Gu has such good goods, we will definitely cooperate in the future. I don't mind telling you that we will ship them to the northern desert. It's not your first time doing business in the northern desert, right?" Qingyu asked curiously. "We started a few years ago. The people of the northern desert are very generous. As long as they are satisfied with the goods, the price is negotiable." The businessman sitting next to Qingyu swirled his wine cup. After the deal was settled, Qingyu asked to leave. This time, he was not stopped. The carriage was still waiting in the yard. The main gate was not far away. At the moment, the gate was closed. No one knew what was going on outside. Qingyu didn't get into the carriage. Instead, he pulled Jiang Huiqing to the main gate. Mr. Sun followed him in confusion. "Mr. Gu, what are you doing?" Qingyu stopped in front of the gate. He turned around and smiled. "Before I leave, I have a big surprise for you." Mr. Sun didn't know why, but he had a bad feeling. When he was about to say something, the gate was knocked open from the outside. Soldiers in armor rushed in from the main gate. "You colluded with the government." Mr. Sun was furious. Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing were surrounded by soldiers. Hearing this, Jiang Huiqing turned to look at him and said in a clear voice, "We are from the government." "What do you mean by colluding with them?" At this moment, Jiang Huiqing no longer had the slightest bit of ignorance on his body. The Northern Desert Army rushed into the house and took everyone under control. Because it was the most relaxed time, no one expected it. Some people were still confused when they were pushed to the front gate. "You planned this from the beginning." Mr. Sun was forced to kneel on the ground. He looked up at Qingyu, who was protected by the crowd. His eyes were full of viciousness. "You dared to trade goods with the Northern Desert. You should have known that this day would come." Qingyu's voice was faint. At this moment, his expression and tone were very different from the Mr. Gu that Mr. Sun was familiar with. "Who are you?" Mr. Sun didn't know that this generous Mr. Gu was the top scholar until he was locked in prison. After catching the people, Fang Jun sent people to interrogate them overnight. A series of clues were dug out. According to the information provided by these people, those well-hidden forces were also caught. As for how to deal with the captured people of the Northern Desert, they had to ask the imperial court first. Fang Jun was finishing the final work in the Northern Desert. The related memorials were sent to Shang Junlin's desk as fast as possible. With the contribution of the Northern Desert Army, Mr. Fang is justified to enter the cabinet. Xinyu sighed after reading the memorials. Then he said, "How does His Majesty plan to deal with the people of the Northern Desert?" Shang Junlin chuckled. "The leader came to the capital. Whether he lives or dies depends on the sincerity of the Northern Desert." Xinyu understood that he was planning to extort a large sum of money. Chapter 150. Xinyu did not believe that such a large transaction was only the personal actions of some people in the Northern Desert. Even if it was just one person, it must have been instructed by someone above. "I just don't know if they know anything that they shouldn't know after hiding in Subei for so long. The Subei army is independent of any forces in Subei. It's impractical for them to try to find out about the internal affairs of the Subei army." Xinyu agreed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to spend so much effort to plant their own people inside. This was all thanks to Shang Junlin's original decision. Separating the Subei army from the internal affairs of the Subei army was opposed by the imperial court. However, Shang Junlin had already made up his mind to separate the Subei army from the internal affairs of the Subei army no matter how much the ministers objected. Facts had also proven that this was the right decision. Otherwise, the matter in Subei would not have been resolved so easily. Other than the leaders of the Northern Desert people, the others will remain in Subei for interrogation and punishment. I told Fang Jun not to have any misgivings. They have been sucking blood in Subei for so long, it's time to pay them back. Shang Junlin's tone was slightly cold. The Northern Desert should have also received the news. If they are escorted back to the capital, the journey will not be peaceful. Since they dared to attack the disaster relief materials, it means that they have their own forces near Subei. I must ask Lord Fong to keep an eye on them. It's best to ask them where they are hiding and take care of them first. This matter involved a lot of people. Capturing the person did not mean that everything was over. Dealing with the aftermath was also very important, especially since the Northern Desert and Subei were too close. If the Northern Desert really wanted to do something, although they were not afraid, it would still be troublesome. The Subei army had just experienced a natural disaster. It would be best if they could recuperate for a while. I will arrange for people to escort them. Fang Jun and the Hidden Dragon Guards have been investigating the hideout of those people. The Northern Desert will send people to negotiate. The heavy burden of negotiating with the Northern Desert fell on Fang Jia. According to her qualifications, this matter should not have fallen on her, but the Subei officialdom had just undergone a great purge, and the officials originally responsible for dealing with the Northern Desert were still in prison. The officials sent from the capital were mostly responsible for the construction and management of the Subei. With the previous experience, the officials unanimously agreed that Fang Jia was the most suitable. This time, the people of the Northern Desert did not dare to underestimate this female official of the Great Huan dynasty. Their understanding of the women of the Great Huan dynasty had always been limited to the role of a housewife and children, so they were caught off guard. After deciding on the candidates, Fang Jun asked Fang Jia to stay. These days, you can put aside your work for the time being and use the time to learn more about the Northern Desert. Last time, they misjudged. This time, they will be more serious. You must know enough about your opponents. This official understands. Fang Jia handed over her work to her colleagues and focused on preparing for the negotiation with the Northern Desert. In order to know more about the Northern Desert, in addition to reading ancient books, she also asked the locals. In order to be more familiar with this case, she specifically went to He Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing to learn more details from them. After they were caught, the officials knew what He Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing had been doing during the time they disappeared. In order to prevent the information from leaking, this plan was only known to a few people, including Fang Jun, from the beginning. The facts proved that their worries were not unfounded. After Mr. Sun and others were caught, through interrogation, they caught a few fish that had escaped the net and were hiding in the official's office. The people of the Subei had not recovered from the aftermath of the collusion between Lord Ho and other high-ranking officials with the Northern Desert. Now they were told that the people of the Northern Desert had been hiding around them. I thought that those damn officials had reached their limit by colluding with the enemy. I didn't expect that the enemy was around us. I know Mr. Sunday. His shop is very famous, and the things he sells are good. Many people like to buy things there. I didn't expect that he was also working for the people of the Northern Desert. Now I'm beginning to wonder if there are still people of the Northern Desert or their lackeys around us. What do you think those people are thinking? When the Northern Desert attacked the Subei, they burned, killed, looted, and committed all kinds of crimes. At that time, many innocent people died under the swords of the Northern Desert. Why did they work for the Northern Desert? For money, they even abandoned their conscience. What else could it be? Don't try to understand this kind of people. You can't understand. Lord Fong is really observant. If it were me, I would have closed the case after getting rid of those corrupt officials. If it weren't for Lord Fong, who was careful and found something wrong, this matter would not have been exposed for a while. Lord He and Lord Jiang are also very important. If it weren't for them taking risks, these people would not have been caught in such a short time. After He Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing returned, they received a lot of curious gazes. Some people couldn't help but ask them questions. This time, they had made a great contribution. After Fang Jun wrote a memorial to show his sincerity, he fought for higher official positions for the two of them. Your performance this time is worthy of praise. With you here, I feel more at ease leaving the Subei. After I leave, I'll leave the matters of the Subei to you. Fang Jun had stayed in the Subei for far longer than expected. Now that the matter was over, it was time for him to prepare for his departure. The transfer of power, the follow-up of the case of the Northern Desert people. Although he was ready to leave, he wouldn't leave before these things were properly handled. He Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing also gained a firm foothold in the Subei this time. After Xinyu finished reading the documents from the Subei, he raised his eyebrows. Lord Fang asked for official positions for these two people. Did the ministers in the court say anything? For a newcomer who had just started out in the officialdom, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that they had reached the heavens in a single bound. Of course there are people who are dissatisfied. He Qingyu, Jiang Huiqing, and Fang Jia have taken the limelight in the Subei and disrupted many people's plans. But no matter how dissatisfied they are, they can't deny the merits of the three people. The Subei needs capable officials to lead, and these three people appeared at the right time. If they don't give official positions to them, are they going to give them to people who have done nothing? Shang Junlin sneered. When they first sent people over, the court initially decided on the official positions for some people, but this didn't mean that these people were qualified. When they arrived in the Subei, they would be reappointed based on their performance. The Subei had many things to do, and didn't need officials who only fought for fame and fortune. In the blink of an eye, it was Xinyu's birthday. Shang Junlin originally wanted to hold a large banquet, but was persuaded by Xinyu on the grounds that he could hold a large banquet next year. He only held a small banquet at Yuzhang Palace. There weren't many people attending the banquet. The consort dowager brought Xinyu over. After not seeing him for a while, Xinyu had changed even more. There were no other masters in the palace. Xinyu didn't have a good relationship with the Zhenbei Marquis Fu. After asking Xinyu, Shang Junlin didn't invite the people of the Zhenbei Marquis Fu into the palace. There weren't many people, but it didn't appear cold and cheerless. There was no need to feign civility. Xinyu liked this kind of atmosphere very much. Xinyu made this for Guijun. He said that the people over there eat this on their birthday. It's called cake. After the consort dowager gave the birthday gift, she had a palace servant bring in a covered box. Cake. Shang Junlin heard this word for the first time. He couldn't help but be curious. Yes. The consort dowager smiled. That little girl struggled for a long time to make it. It looks very pleasing. Under the consort dowager's signal, the palace servant opened the box. A sweet and fragrant smell instantly overflowed. Xinyu had always been fond of sweet things. After smelling the fragrance, he instantly sat up straight. His eyes couldn't help but glance at the box. Shang Junlin couldn't see through Xinyu's thoughts. He waved his hand and asked the palace servant to bring the cake over. The palace servant was instructed to take the cake out of the box and put it on the table in front of Xinyu. The cake was round and wasn't very big. It was decorated with many fruits. The appearance was very beautiful. As it got closer, the smell of the cake became more enticing. The palace servant cut a small piece and put it on the plate. Xinyu took it and tasted it. He unconsciously narrowed his eyes. It's very delicious. Your Majesty should also try it. Xinyu picked up a piece and fed it to Shang Junlin's mouth. Shang Junlin took a bite and said, it's very sweet. Shen Yu knew that Shang Junlin didn't like to eat sweet things like he did. He only fed him a bite occasionally. In addition to the cake, Shen Yu also took out several small transparent bottles. This is the perfume this servant made. For the time being, there are only a few scents. Perfume. Is it something similar to incense? Shen Yu picked up a bottle. The transparent glass bottle was filled with a transparent blue liquid. It looked very charming. Yes, but it's more convenient than incense. You only need to apply it on your body. The disadvantage is that the fragrance can't stay for too long. This servant has already written down the recipe. Shen Yu presented a thin book. This is what this servant made while making medical alcohol. One of the ingredients is alcohol. The fragrance is extracted from different kinds of flowers. They are all harmless to the human body. Shen Yu added. She knew that the perfume she made was very simple. It was nothing in modern times. However, in ancient times where there was no perfume, it was novel and convenient. The people of Dahuan loved incense. Shen Yu was one of the more unique ones. Perhaps it was because of his health that he couldn't accept incense. Shen Yu didn't want to try it on himself. He turned to Shang Junlin and asked, Your Majesty, do you want to try it? Seeing the eagerness in Shen Yu's eyes, Shang Junlin had no choice but to compromise. Only you dare to ask me to try this and that. Under the guidance of Shen Yu applied some of the perfume on Shang Junlin's wrist. A faint fragrance spread out. It was completely different from incense. Shen Yu sniffed it. It was a very light fragrance. It wasn't pungent and was very comfortable. If this perfume is sold in a shop, it will definitely be very popular. Not only women, it would also be popular among men. Shen Yu put down Shang Junlin's hand and said to Shen Yu, I will let people try it according to your method. If it is successful, I will give you a share of the profits. Shen Yu didn't have the habit of taking things from others for free. He would pay for everything that Shen Yu took out. After the small banquet, Shang Junlin brought Shen Yu out of the palace. The place they went to this time was different from the previous times. It was a very spacious grassland. Shen Yu looked around. Your Majesty, why did you bring me here? The autumn hunt is about to begin. Do you know how to ride a horse? Shang Junlin clapped his hands and someone brought 2 horses over. One was black and the other was white. The black horse was obviously very familiar with Shang Junlin. It intimately went up to him. After being reborn, Shen Yu had never ridden a horse. He walked forward and touched the other horse. Your Majesty, do you want me to know how to ride a horse or not? Chapter 151. I originally wanted to teach you, but it seems like EU doesn't need it. Shang Junlin felt a little regretful. I haven't ridden it for a long time. If your Majesty doesn't find it troublesome, you can teach me again. The white horse was very docile. As a stranger, Shen Yu didn't have any reaction when he approached. Try it first. I will watch you from the side. Hearing this, Shen Yu flipped over and mounted the horse. It was obvious that he wasn't a novice. His movements were very beautiful. Shen Yu sat on the horse and squinted his eyes as a gentle breeze blew over. Shang Junlin also got on the horse and steered the black horse to walk beside the white horse. The black horse didn't like this kind of slow pace and snorted a few times. Shen Yu squeezed the horse's belly and let the white horse slow down for a few steps. After it got the feeling, it gradually sped up. Shang Junlin followed him at the same speed. After riding the horse for a round, Shen Yu felt more and more carefree. In his previous life, he rode a horse for the sake of running. He rarely rode a horse just for the sake of riding a horse. Your Majesty, why did you want to bring me here to ride a horse? Shin Yu pulled the reins and slowly slowed down the horse. The black horse also slowed down and took the initiative to approach the white horse. I thought that I would feel bored staying in the palace all day. After riding a horse, my mood would be much better. Shang Junlin held the reins and looked at Shin Yu. I used to feel bored and would come here for a walk. After you entered the palace, I came less often. After a few days, Wu Kuang might not even recognize me. Wu Kuang was the black horse's name. When it heard its master call its name, it snorted. Shang Junlin reached out and patted the black horse's head. It can really make me feel better. Your Majesty, why did you only bring me here now? Shin Yu raised his eyebrows slightly. I thought that you wouldn't like it. Before you entered the palace, did you rarely ride a horse? According to the information that the hidden dragon guards had gathered, Shin Yu shouldn't know how to ride a horse. At the very least, he shouldn't be so familiar with riding a horse. Shang Junlin suppressed another doubt in his heart. Duke Shinbei once asked someone to teach me how to ride a horse. That person took advantage of concubine Ru and made things difficult for me. For a long time, I really didn't like to ride a horse. These were all memories from a very long time ago. They had long since faded and settled in some unknown corner. Even if they were mentioned again, it would not cause any emotional fluctuations. After learning how to ride a horse, Shin Yu didn't want to ride for a long time. Every time he got on a horse, he would think of that person's mean and belittling words, and he would think of those scars that shouldn't have landed on his body. Later on, in order to make a living, he had no choice but to ride a horse himself. In the face of life and death, the shadow of his childhood was dispelled, and the influence of that person completely disappeared. Shang Junlin tightened his grip on the reins. He could tell from Shin Yu's light tone that he didn't care about this matter, but he couldn't help but feel distressed. How old was he when he learned how to ride a horse? Little Shin Yu faced a malicious teacher. Learning how to ride a horse was a very scary thing for Shin Yu at that time. He faced the indifference from his father, the malice from his father's concubine, and the days when he couldn't participate. Little Yu had to suffer a lot before he became strong and calmly faced all of this. Feeling Shang Junlin's gaze, Shin Yu smiled and said, Your Majesty, you know me. I usually take revenge on the spot. The person who taught me how to ride a horse didn't end well. In fact, he didn't dare to do anything to me. After all, if something happened to me, Duke Shinbei would not let him go. He just suffered a little more. After Shin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly realized that Shang Junlin's anger had become stronger. His comforting words didn't calm Shang Junlin's anger, but made him angrier and more scared. Shang Junlin rode his horse to Shin Yu's side. He stretched out his long arms and hugged Shin Yu in front of him. Your Majesty. Shin Yu bent down slightly and grabbed Shang Junlin's sleeve. It's all in the past. I won't let anyone have the chance to hurt you in the future. Shang Junlin held the reins with one hand and tightly hugged Shin Yu in his arms with the other. It's all in the past, Shin Yu laughed softly. If I knew your Majesty cared so much, I wouldn't have said it. These things were equivalent to what happened in his previous life. It was so long ago, and he had already taken revenge. Thinking about it now, it didn't hurt or itch. Why can't you say it to me? Those things happened to you. I feel very distressed. Shang Junlin didn't feel anything about what had happened to him, but he couldn't bear to see Shin Yu suffer even a little bit. Shin Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's chest and felt the steady and powerful heartbeat in his chest. An indescribable emotion slowly filled her chest. So this is what it feels like to be in someone's heart. So this is what it feels like to be sincerely loved by someone. What about him? Is his feeling for Shang Junlin also love? The black horse slowly trotted on the grass. Shang Junlin didn't say anything about letting go of Xinyu, and Xinyu didn't say anything either. Nestled in the man's arms, Xinyu seemed to be thinking about a lot of things, but also seemed to be thinking about nothing. The white horse followed beside the black horse and occasionally lowered its head to chew on the grass. Shang Junlin lowered his head and rubbed Xinyu's cheek. "What are you thinking about?" "Your Majesty, tell me about the past." At this moment, Xinyu really wanted to know more about Shang Junlin. "About my past? There's nothing to talk about. I couldn't stay in the palace anymore, so I asked to go to the border. Although it was difficult at the border, it was better than in the palace. Later, when I received military merits, no one dared to disrespect me after I returned to the capital. The previous emperor's princes were instigated to make trouble for me, but in the end, they only brought displeasure to themselves. Later on, they didn't come to provoke me." Shang Junlin originally thought that he wouldn't like to talk about the past, but now that he said it, he realized that the things that he thought he would never be able to let go had become insignificant in his life. "Does this grass field belong to your Majesty?" Xinyu had never heard of such a place in the capital. "It was built after I ascended the throne," Shang Junlin nodded. "At that time, I stayed at the border for a long time and felt that I wasn't used to the life in the capital. When I had nothing to do, I would come here. There aren't many people who know about this place, right?" They hadn't seen anyone since they came in. Other than the servants who stayed here from the beginning, no one else came here. As for outsiders, there seemed to be a young boy who accidentally broke in. His face was covered in dirt, so I had people send him out. At that time, I had just come back from the battlefield. The murderous aura on me was very strong, and it seemed to scare him. When I asked him, he didn't answer. "Your Majesty, did you not punish him for disturbing your Majesty?" Xinyu turned to look at him. "In a Yu's mind, am I such a murderous person?" Shang Junlin smiled. It seemed that he could still remember the young boy's bright black eyes. Seeing that pair of beast-like eyes, Shang Junlin suddenly lost interest in pursuing the matter. He didn't punish the guard and only had people send the child out to repair the damaged areas. Since then, no one accidentally broke in. It was just a child. He didn't even know how he got in. He was just over there. Shang Junlin pointed to the front left. "I saw him there." Xinyu looked in the direction Shang Junlin pointed. At that time, there were a few fences there, but they were later taken down. According to Shang Junlin's words, a picture appeared in Xinyu's mind. Those fences weren't very old, but they were damaged by the sun and wind. They were all tilted together. Xinyu blinked and said very softly, "Your Majesty didn't investigate the child's background." At that time, I only stayed in the capital for a few days. The border was in a state of emergency, so I left. This matter was put aside. If you didn't mention it today, I might not have remembered. Shang Junlin felt that something was wrong. Why does you care so much about this matter? Does your Majesty know? When I was young, I was chased by a group of unknown people. I fled to a deserted grassland. In order not to be recognized, I made my body and face dirty. Later, it rained heavily. I hid under the broken fences and prayed for the rain to stop. A cloak fell from the sky and covered me. This was something that Xinyu, who had experienced 2 lifetimes, firmly remembered in his heart. That day, he was drenched in the rain. After returning home, he had a high fever. His memory of the chase became very vague. The only thing he clearly remembered was the cloak that fell from the sky. This time, it was Shang Junlin who was surprised. The arm around Xinyu's waist unconsciously tightened. His voice was full of uncertainty. "The child I met at that time was a you." I knew it. That day, I found a group of suspicious people near the horse farm. I thought they were coming for me. So they were coming for you. At that time, the relationship between the Great Huan and other countries was very tense, and there were all kinds of problems within the Great Huan. Shang Junlin would encounter a group of people who wanted to assassinate him every few days, and he was used to it, so he dealt with them without asking. He didn't need to ask who sent the people to assassinate him. He only needed to record down the account. So it turned out that Your Majesty saved me once. Later, those people didn't appear again. It seems that they were afraid of Your Majesty's existence. Shen Yu's voice was tight. It turned out that Shang Junlin had protected him for so long without him knowing. Shang Junlin sighed and rested his head on Shen Yu's shoulder. If I had known, would have directly brought you back. Even if I asked a few more questions, it would have been better. However, he didn't ask anything. He only handed the unconscious child to the servant. After that, he didn't ask anything because of various things. Shen Yu raised his hand and touched Shang Junlin's face. He whispered, "This is already very good. We didn't miss each other." Shang Junlin leaned his head and kissed Shen Yu. There was a burst of fear in his heart. If there was a slight deviation at that time, would he have completely missed you? Shen Yu leaned his head and hugged the man's neck. He took the initiative to kiss him. Shen Yu took the initiative to kiss him. Shang Junlin felt Shen Yu's possessiveness from this kiss. The desire in his heart was instantly ignited. The deeper the kiss, the harder Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu's waist. The two of them were so close together that they could feel any changes in their bodies. Ayu. After the kiss, Shang Junlin rubbed Shen Yu's cheek. His voice was hoarse. Shen Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's shoulder and moved her body. Shang Junlin suddenly grasped the reins. Ayu. His voice was even hoarser. I'll take you back. After saying that, Shang Junlin pulled the reins and wanted the black horse to turn around. Shen Yu held his hand. There were still tears in her eyes. She murmured, "I don't want to go back." Shang Junlin's eyes were dark. He resisted the urge to tear her apart and eat her up. Who knew that the chosen prey not only didn't appreciate his kindness, but also came forward to tease him? "I want to be here, on the back of the horse, on the ground, under the sky. Only Your Majesty and I. Does Your Majesty want to?" Chapter 152. Shang Junlin's Adam's apple bobbed violently, indicating his thoughts. The man did not answer and directly kissed Shen Yu. His blue and black clothes intertwined, undulating up and down. In the end, Shen Yu paid a heavy price for taking the initiative to provoke him. Shang Junlin lay on the grass with Shen Yu lying on top of him. The two horses, one black and one white, were leisurely grazing not far away. From time to time, they intimately rubbed against each other. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's waist with one hand and placed the other hand on his back, gently stroking his soft hair. Shen Yu bit his lower lip. The corners of his eyes were red and misty, and his body was slightly trembling. "Are you okay?" Shang Junlin asked in a hoarse voice. Shen Yu shook his head. It was just that the aftertaste was too long, and he could not bear to be stimulated. Shen Yu felt something, and his eyes widened. "Your Majesty, you said that you will follow me today." Shang Junlin used a little force to stop Shen Yu from bouncing up. "But just now." Shen Yu suddenly stopped, calmed his breathing, and said in a calm voice, "The ground was very dirty." The man chuckled and bit his red earlobe. Don't worry. It won't be dirty like this." "Can't we wait until we go back?" Shen Yu gasped. Ayu said it himself. Sitting on the back of a horse, enjoying the world and admiring the earth. "I have to fulfill Ayu's wish." Shang Junlin did what he said. After they went back, his hair and body were stained with grass. Only the ends of Shen Yu's hair were stained with grass. After changing his clothes, Shin Yu half lay on the bed and looked at the slightly embarrassed Shang Junlin. He laughed and said, "I said it would be very dirty." Shang Junlin took a long time to wash up, so he sat on the bed with half-dried water vapor. "Won't it be clean after washing?" Shin Yu lifted Shang Junlin's hair and looked at it, nodding, "It is clean." "Your Majesty, is it destined that you will let me go that day? If it was another person that appeared at that time, would you let him go?" Shin Yu retracted his hand and put it under his chin. Shang Junlin stared at him. "Maybe. I'm glad that I didn't do anything at that time." According to his temperament at that time, he would not let anyone go when he found a suspicious person, no matter whether the person was a man or a woman or how old they were, of course. Shin Yu's escaped the environment but also fell into Immerse. SSSS. It was different now. He had grown up and had the ability to protect Shin Yu from harm in the face of danger. They had met at the right time. Thinking about it, I still find it hard to believe that there is such a long hidden fate between me and His Majesty. Isn't it good? I once thought that it would be great if I could have met you earlier. I didn't expect that we had met long ago. Shang Junlin stroked Shin Yu's hair. You grew up in Jinbei Marquis Fu, and it was much safer for her to be by my side. Did the group of people who wanted to kill you never appear again? Yes, it only appeared once in my memory. Shin Yu even suspected that the encounter that day was just a dream. There was no pursuit, nor was there any warmth from the sky. Does you have any clues as to where those people came from? Those people had been killed long ago, and it happened many years ago. Even if there were clues left at that time, it would be difficult to find them now. At first, I suspected that they were concubine ruse people. Later, I tested them and found that they weren't. I was too young at that time, and I didn't have any useful people. I couldn't find anything after checking, so I could only leave it at that. This was also why Shin Yu suspected that it was a dream. At that time, he didn't know that those people had been killed by Shang Junlin. He only felt that these people appeared out of thin air and disappeared suddenly, and he couldn't find any trace of them. I remember that those people were the same as the others who wanted to assassinate me. They were specially trained killers. They couldn't have attacked you because they had a grudge against Jinbei Marquis. It shouldn't be. Everyone knows that Jinbei Marquis doesn't have any father-son affection for me. I have the title of the legitimate son, but that's all. If they wanted to take revenge on Jinbei Marquis, it would be better to directly find concubine Ru and her son instead of attacking me. Before Shin Yu entered the palace, concubine Ru had been in charge of the Jinbei Marquis' household. With Jinbei Marquis' favoritism, her position in the Jinbei Marquis' mansion was comparable to that of the legal wife. Everyone knew that Jinbei Marquis doted on this concubine very much. If it weren't for the law, she would have been promoted to the legal wife. Shang Junlin knew the situation in the Jinbei Marquis' mansion better, and he knew that Shin Yu was telling the truth. Everyone in the capital knew how much Jinbei Marquis doted on this concubine. It's not concubine Ru or Jinbei Marquis. Who would send so many well-trained killers to kill a child? I was young at that time, and I didn't go out of the Jinbei Marquis' mansion. It's definitely not just because of me. After eliminating all the reasons, what else is left? Shin Yu thought about this question for the first time. In his previous life, until his death, no one had come to find trouble with him. Why did they only attack once? Why did they attack him? Have you ever thought that these people came for your mother? Shang Junlin frowned. Because of my mother. Shin Yu's eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. To him, mother was just a title. He had never heard anyone mention his mother. Until now, he knew very little about his mother. In fact, there's always been a very strange thing. Since I was young, I've never heard anyone talk about my mother. Others may not know about the internal affairs of the Jinbei Marquis mansion, so it's normal that they don't know about it. However, no one in the mansion has ever mentioned it. Counting the time, several of Jinbei Marquis' concubines have been in the mansion since my mother was alive. There are also some old people who have been serving the mansion for a long time. They are always secretive about talking about my mother. I originally thought that it was because my mother had committed some taboo, so they didn't dare to mention it. Now it seems that it's not the case. If those people are really related to your mother, then your mother's identity is not simple. Your Majesty, I want to go to the mansion of Jinbei. Shin Yu sat up. He had to know what was going on with the assassination. Because of this incident, the two of them unexpectedly appeared in the mansion of Jinbei the next day. Marquis, eldest young master has come to the mansion. Jinbei Marquis was discussing with his confidant. He had sent several invitations to Yuzhang Palace but did not get a reply. This made him a little worried. The mansion of Jinbei Marquis had encountered some problems recently. If Xin Yu was willing to stand on their side, many problems could be solved easily. Are you sure it's eldest young master? Jinbei Marquis stood up. The servant did not understand why Jinbei Marquis had such a big reaction, but he still nodded and said, "It's eldest young master." Eldest young master had been in the mansion for more than 10 years. He had only left for a few months, so he would not mistake him. Besides eldest young master, is there anyone else? Jinbei Marquis asked as he walked out. There is also the young master who came to the mansion last time. Jinbei Marquis suddenly stopped. He stroked his chest and gasped for breath. After he calmed down, he continued to walk forward. Greetings, Your Majesty. Jinbei Marquis sent all the servants out and saluted respectfully. When he saw them, Jinbei Marquis felt relieved. During this period of time when he was waiting for a reply, he had been very nervous. Before Xin Yu left the mansion, they had a quarrel. He also knew that he had neglected this legitimate son. He intended to make up for it and repair the relationship. However, Xin Yu had always turned a blind eye to the signals he gave. He originally wanted to use Xin Yu's birthday to ease the relationship between the two sides. Seeing that time had passed and Yuzhang Palace had not given a definite reply, Jinbei Marquis suspected that Xin Yu really did not want to care about the mansion of Jinbei. Xin Yu brought Shang Junlin to the mansion of Jinbei. Marquis, you don't have to be so polite. Shang Junlin said lightly. This time, they came to the mansion of Jinbei without the emperor's honor. Just like last time, Jinbei Marquis only looked at their clothes and knew their intentions. He did not expose their identities in front of the servants. I have neglected you a lot in the past. I wanted to do something for you on this birthday. Jinbei Marquis wanted to build a relationship with Xin Yu, but he was interrupted by Xin Yu. I didn't see Marquis care so much in the mansion of Jinbei in the past. In this case, Marquis does not have to worry about these small things in the future. I came here this time because I have something to ask Marquis about my mother. Xin Yu noticed that when he said the last sentence, Jinbei Marquis' expression changed instantly. Your mother has been dead for many years. There is nothing to say. Let the dead rest in peace. Jinbei Marquis' eyes flashed a touch of complexity. I want to know my mother's identity. As my mother's only child, I think I should be qualified to know my mother's true identity, right? Xin Yu deliberately emphasized the word true. It's not that I don't want to say it, but I don't know. Jinbei Marquis sighed. Your mother didn't tell me. Xin Yu was suspicious. How could the dignified Jinbei Marquis marry a woman of unknown origin? I didn't lie to you. I only know that her identity is not ordinary. I don't know the details. Jinbei Marquis wiped his face. Is she really dead? How did she die? She was sick. After you were born, she suddenly fell seriously ill. I invited all the famous doctors in the capital, even the Imperial Hospital, but they still couldn't save her. This matched the information Xinyu knew. For a moment, Xinyu didn't know whether Jinbei Marquis was lying or not. Then why has no one in the mansion of Jinbei ever said anything about my mother? In any case, she was the madam of the mansion of Jinbei Marquis. This was also your mother's request. I know that there are people your mother left by your side. Think about it, did they also not talk about your mother? Xinyu thought about it and found that it was really like this. It seemed that with her passing, she also took away the traces she left behind. Xinyu went to ask several old people who served him, and also asked the concubines who had been in the mansion for a long time. The information he got was very little. This trip to the mansion of Jinbei Marquis not only didn't dispel the doubts in Xinyu's heart, but also made all kinds of doubts snowball. On the way back to the palace, Xinyu tried to recall the details of the assassination. But no matter how he tried, the memory of that day was vague. He didn't know when the assassination began, how long he had escaped, and how he returned to the mansion of Jinbei Marquis. There was also Zhu Wang's inexplicable words. Your Majesty, what do you think is Zhu Wang's purpose for setting up such a big trap and making Prince Yu believe in that sentence? Chapter 153. It was better to ask the person himself. After returning to the palace, Shang Junlin brought Xinyu to the palace where Zhu Wang was staying. How has Mr. Zhu been these 2 days? The servants must have been serving you well, right? Xinyu saw Mr. Zhu sitting in front of the stone table in the courtyard and walked over to sit down. Shang Junlin sat beside him. Mr. Zhu looked at the two of them and mocked himself. Shouldn't the two of you know better than anyone else how I have been? Xinyu did not seem to understand the resentment in Mr. Zhu's voice and said casually, the servants in the palace were all carefully selected. It's good that they did not disappoint Mr. Zhu. Why did you lock me up here? Mr. Zhu put down the teacup in his hand and looked at the two of them sharply. We just wanted to invite Mr. Zhu to the palace as a guest. How can you say that we are locking you up? Are you complaining that the emperor and I did not treat you well? Xinyu smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. If you are not satisfied with anything, you can tell us. Shang Junlin added. Do you really think that you are treating a guest? Mr. Zhu's eyes twitched. Who would restrict their guests' freedom? Since Mr. Zhu was able to escape from the hidden dragon guards, it shouldn't be a problem for you to enter the palace, right? Xinyu pretended to be confused. The place that Mr. Zhu escaped from was much more heavily guarded than this place, right? What do you want? Mr. Zhu could tell that the two of them were doing this on purpose. Nothing much. I just wanted to see if Mr. Zhu, who has been rumored to be a god, could really understand destiny and transcend mortals. Now that I think about it. Xinyu clicked his tongue lightly, his meaning self-evident. You are just going to let him do whatever he wants. Mr. Zhu turned to look at Shang Junlin and asked in disbelief. I also want to know what Mr. Zhu is capable of as he was able to escape from the hidden dragon guards. Shang Junlin's words were a huge blow to Mr. Zhu. Mr. Zhu relied on his identity as a talented person and was respected wherever he went. When had he ever been treated like this? For a moment, he was so angry that he couldn't even maintain his composure. He sneered and decided not to pretend anymore. Your Majesty, didn't you bring me to the capital for that proverb? When Shang Junlin sent people to King Yu's fief, Mr. Zhu purposely let people leak the proverb. He knew that with the current relationship between Shang Junlin and Xinyu, this proverb would definitely attract the other party's attention. This was also his goal. Sure enough, not long after, he felt that someone was secretly looking for him. He purposely exposed himself and was brought to the capital. Then, he escaped under the watchful eyes of the public. All of this was planned long ago. Everything was going according to plan until the moment before he took the initiative to appear in front of Shang Junlin. He did not understand what went wrong that caused the final outcome to deviate so much. He had been in this line of work for many years. He knew that the higher a person was, the more they cared about these things. No one was exempt from this. Even Shang Junyue, a prince, was like this, let alone the emperor, Shang Junlin. If he really sneered at these things, why did he have to bring him to the capital from so far away? Zhen did have people bring you to the capital because of that proverb. Shang Junlin did not deny this point. Because this proverb involves the emperor. Zhen wants to know whether this proverb appeared accidentally or inevitably. Zhen wants to know whether it was intentional or not. Your Majesty doubts the authenticity of this proverb. Shang Junlin did not answer. Instead, he asked, why did you say that to King Yu? Why? When this poor Taoist divines, he can tell whoever he wants. Does this poor Taoist need a reason? Mr. Zhu was furious and no longer acted like an expert. Was it really divined? Shen Yu's voice was filled with suspicion. Mr. Zhu could not stand it when others did not believe him. What benefits does this poor Taoist get by lying about this matter? If you want to talk about benefits, isn't it all for the two children of Duke Bei's family? They don't need to do anything to obtain the love of the emperor. On the surface, there was nothing wrong with Mr. Zhu's words. However, if one thought about it carefully, they would find that this was not the case. Does Mr. Zhu really think that this proverb is a good thing for us? If so, why doesn't Mr. Zhu say that you are the destined one? Shen Yu's lips curved mockingly. How can it be the same? How is it different? Mr. Zhu was speechless. You know very well in your heart that this sentence seems to be very beneficial to me, but in fact, it has firmly imprisoned my life. Those who approach me are all people with impure intentions. Those who I like might be afraid of getting close to me because of the meaning behind this sentence. Compared to enjoying glory and wealth for nothing, the greater possibility is that I will become the target of those with ambition and will never be able to find peace. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand that was hanging by his side. Shen Yu paused for a moment and held Shang Junlin's hand back. He continued, it doesn't matter whether this proverb was divined by you or not. When you spread this proverb, you should have known what would happen to me and Shen Qingran because of this proverb. I am not curious about whether this proverb is true or not. I just want to know where your hostility towards me comes from. Mr. Zhu avoided his gaze and said, this poor Taoist doesn't know what you are talking about. You have been planning this from the very beginning when you contacted Prince Yu. Now that you saw that Prince Yu could not achieve your goal, you set your sights on His Majesty. Let me guess, you will do what you did to Prince Yu in the past and find a way to make His Majesty believe in your words. Then you will propose to bring Shen Qingran closer to the palace, right? Mr. Zhu avoided his gaze even more. Why do you know all this? He had never told anyone about his plan. Those people worshipped him as a god. They only needed to obey his orders. They didn't need to know what he wanted to do. Why do I know? Shen Yu lowered his eyes. He just thought of many suspicious points in his previous life. For example, Prince Yu sometimes favored him and sometimes Shen Qingran. If Prince Yu approached him with the purpose of conquering the world from the beginning, then Mr. Zhu hid behind the scenes and manipulated everything. Those strange points could be explained. Now that I am suspicious of you, I will not let you go before I solve my doubts. If you take the initiative to tell me, you will suffer less. That proverb is true. Mr. Zhu struggled for a while. He seemed to have figured something out. It's just that the result of the divination only pointed to you. Your concubine-born brother was added by me out of selfishness. You are right. I really don't want you to have an easy time. After all, you are that person's child. At the end, Mr. Zhu smiled strangely. The debt she owes should be paid by you. Do you know my mother? Shen Yu grasped Shang Junlin's hand tightly. Unfortunately, no matter how Shen Yu asked, Mr. Zhu refused to speak about his mother. Don't worry. Zhen will send people to investigate. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and walked back to Yuzhang Palace. Zhen won't take Zhu Wang's words seriously. I'm very curious. What did mother do that year to make everyone keep their mouths shut about her existence? No matter if they loved her or hated her, no one was willing to speak about her. Shen Yu couldn't figure it out. Maybe it wasn't that they didn't want to speak, but that they couldn't. Too many things happened that year. The former emperor was deposed and the power in the imperial court changed. Everything was mixed together. Shang Junlin looked at the clouds in the sky. It was also that year that his life underwent an earth-shattering change. The death of the Duke of Zhenbei's wife was just a small splash in the rolling waves. Her presence among the nobles in the capital was not very high. After her death, the Duke of Zhenbei's mansion did not make a big deal out of it. When everything was settled, another woman appeared beside the Duke of Zhenbei. Ru Yinyang's appearance covered all traces of Duke Bei's wife's existence in the shortest time possible. Duke Bei said that he didn't know the origin of mother. I don't believe it. Shen Yu blinked and said in a soft voice, Your Majesty, I want to know what happened that year. You will know. Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu tightly in his arms. Shen promises. Shen Yu didn't want to know the truth out of kindness for his mother. Instead, he intuitively felt that there was a crucial secret related to him hidden in this matter. Those people in his previous life didn't reveal themselves until his death. What would happen after his death? What would happen to the story? Shen Yu had no way to know. Shen Yu gave the perfume recipe he got from Shen Yu to shopkeeper Su. Shopkeeper Su's shop expanded again. After discussing with Shen Yu, they opened a branch in Jiangnan. The wealth of Jiangnan was not inferior to that of the capital. Long before the branch was opened, there were aristocratic families in Jiangnan who specially hired people to come to the capital to buy perfume. Fang Jun returned to the capital before the start of the autumn hunt. He also brought back the people from the northern desert who were caught in Subei with him. Fang Jun made a great contribution this time. The courtiers also knew that the position in the cabinet was reserved for him. When Shang Junlin issued the decree, they weren't surprised. At this point, there were two courtiers in Dahuan's cabinet who held the same position as Shang Junlin. The day of the autumn hunt quietly arrived. The Shangyi Bureau sent new clothes. Shang Junlin's clothes were still black with dragon patterns embroidered on them. Shen Yu's clothes were red and black. The black was requested by Shen Yu, and the red was designated by Shang Junlin. A group of people went to the location of the autumn hunt. The area around Mount Chiyu had already been cleared. They were just waiting for the emperor to bring the courtiers. The founding emperor of Dahuan attached great importance to martial arts. The annual autumn hunt had been passed down since then and had never been interrupted. Isn't it said that His Majesty dotes on His Highness? Why don't I see His Highness's honor guard? A courtier looked ahead curiously. The higher the status, the more they cared about these formalities. In the harem, the empress, imperial concubine. Different positions had different honor guards. At the front of the procession, there was only the emperor's honor guard. His Highness's honor guard was nowhere to be seen. More than one courtier noticed this problem. Recently, because of the redistribution of power in the imperial court, the courtiers didn't pay attention to Shang Junlin's private affairs. They didn't pay attention to the harem. The courtiers discussed in private. In the carriage at the front, Shen Yu lowered the curtain. When they see me coming down from His Majesty's carriage, I don't know what they will say. They don't need to interfere in my affairs. The carriage slowly came to a stop. Shang Junlin got off the carriage. The courtiers were about to greet him when Shang Junlin turned to the carriage and stretched out his hand. His slender white fingers stretched out and put on the emperor's outstretched hand. The emperor's arm exerted force and the person in the carriage was carried out. The courtiers widened their eyes and watched Xinyu being carried out of the emperor's carriage. Chapter 154. The surprise on the faces of the ministers could not be concealed. Even if there was only Guijun in the harem, Guijun was only Guijun. At most, he would be the deputy empress. Since ancient times, only the empress had the right to sit with the emperor. What did His Majesty mean by this? The ministers secretly looked at the others. Was His Majesty planning to make Xinyu the empress? Shang Junlin did not care about what these people thought. After carrying Xinyu down, he said a few words to the ministers and then took Xinyu to the tent. The ministers left behind looked at each other. After a long time, someone couldn't help but say, "What is His Majesty thinking?" Even if he dotes on Guijun, he should not go against the ancestral rules like this. Do you still not understand His Majesty's attitude? At the beginning, His Majesty promised that there would only be Guijun in the harem. Whether he is Guijun or the empress, is there a difference? Another minister sneered. Are we going to let His Majesty do as he pleases? What His Majesty wants to do, is it something you and I can control? I say, the autumn hunt is a happy day. Don't make yourself unhappy because of some small things. So what if we speak? His Majesty will still do what he should do. This minister's words received a lot of agreement. Only some old-fashioned ministers still frowned. They really could not stand this kind of impolite thing. Even if we know Guijun's importance in His Majesty's heart, as long as Guijun is not the empress, she should follow Guijun's rules. Etiquette cannot be ignored. Do you want to remind His Majesty to make her the empress soon? The Minister of Rights frowned. You probably don't know. His Majesty once mentioned making her the empress, but it was put aside for some reason. If you want His Majesty to make Guijun the empress soon, you can mention it. This time, a few people who were eager to try showed hesitation on their faces. Their purpose was to suppress Guijun's arrogance, not to make her the empress. His Majesty really talked to you about making her the empress. After the ministers dispersed, the Prime Minister walked to the Minister of Revenue and asked in a low voice. How could I lie about this? The Minister of Revenue shook his head. It happened a few days ago. I thought I had to start preparing for the coronation ceremony. I didn't expect His Majesty to only mention it once and never mention it again. The Prime Minister pondered. You and I both know what His Majesty is like. Since he brought up this matter, he must have had such an idea. As for why he gave up later on, it most likely has something to do with you. The Minister of Revenue said, Actually, I don't object to His Majesty conferring Guijun as empress. The things that Guijun has done, if taken to the previous court, are all worthy of praise. Other people can't do this. Moreover, His Majesty has no intention of taking in new people. Prime Minister, did His Majesty cancel next year's election again? The Minister of Revenue said, Before you entered the palace, His Majesty didn't like these things, saying that they were a waste of money and manpower. Now that His Majesty has someone by his side, it's normal for him to be pushed away. The Prime Minister, the court will be lively then. The election was held every 3 years to select women from the populace to fill the imperial harem. When the previous emperor was on the throne, every year's election was especially lively. After the new emperor ascended the throne, this craze gradually subsided. The first election was rejected by Shang Junlin on the grounds that he had to go to war. The second election was rejected with the reason that the populace needs to recuperate and there's no need to waste money and manpower. The third election was held next spring. No one knew what reason the emperor would use this time. It's good that those women don't enter the imperial harem. Otherwise, the imperial harem will be entangled with the power of the previous court, and it will be more complicated. Although that was what the prime minister said, he also knew that this kind of situation was hard to avoid. People like Shang Junlin were in the minority, and could even be said to be rare. In all the previous emperors, there was no one in the imperial harem who didn't have women sent into the palace by their ministers. The ministers needed to use this opportunity to strengthen their position, and the emperor also needed to use this opportunity to win over his ministers. Shang Junlin was different. His method of ascending the throne was different from the other emperors. Those who tried to use the ancestral system and other reasons to control him were all killed by him. Under his ruthless methods, no one dared to go against him. After many years of practice, the ministers in the court also knew that if they made the emperor unhappy, they would be making themselves unhappy. Unless it involved their own interests, under normal circumstances, they wouldn't make themselves unhappy. Shin Yu's luggage was placed together with Shang Junlin's, and the palace servants nimbly packed it up. "Your Majesty, where do I live?" Shin Yu waited for a while, but no one brought him to his residence. He was puzzled. "Other than by my side, where else does you want to go?" Shang Junlin lifted Shin Yu's hair that was hanging down. "When I came here, it was already eye-catching enough that I rode in the same carriage with your Majesty. Now, your Majesty wants me to live here. Are you trying to test the tolerance of the ministers?" Shin Yu's fingertips brushed across the man's chest. Even through the clothes, Shang Junlin still felt a raging fire where his fingertips were brushed. Shang Junlin grabbed Shin Yu's hand, and his other hand wrapped around Shin Yu's waist. He pulled Shin Yu close to himself. "That's their business. What does it have to do with me? You and I are husband and wife. We should live together. Or is you willing to let me stay alone in an empty room?" "I didn't say that." Shin Yu rolled his eyes. "I'm just afraid that those people will submit memorials and say something about me." "You is worried about this?" Shang Junlin's eyes were smiling. He slowly approached Shin Yu, and his low magnetic voice sounded in her ears. "Then you will serve your husband well. I won't let them say anything. How about it? Shouldn't your Majesty solve the trouble you caused yourself?" Shin Yu's earlobe was bitten after he finished speaking. It wasn't heavy, but there was a numbing feeling spreading from her earlobe. The tip of his teeth ground, and her earlobe instantly turned red. Shin Yu's body trembled. Her sensitive earlobe was finally released after being bullied. The man's lips didn't immediately withdraw, but he kissed the bright and tender place. The trembling feeling came one after another. Shin Yu clutched the man's clothes in front of his chest. Her body was weak. If it weren't for Shang Junlin's arms supporting her, she would have slipped down. The kiss went all the way down, and the faint marks were covered one by one. Shin Yu's hand holding the man's clothes became more and more forceful. Before the situation developed to the point of no return, Eunuch Meng's voice sounded outside the tent. "Your Majesty, the Prime Minister and several officials want to see you." The charming atmosphere was interrupted. Shang Junlin frowned unhappily, and a storm was brewing in his eyes. Shin Yu looked at the unhappy man on top of her and couldn't help laughing. "Your Majesty, you should go quickly. Don't let the Prime Minister and the others wait for too long." Shang Junlin looked at the person under him faintly, and reluctantly took his hand out from under his clothes. "Don't mention other men, and don't gloat." Shang Junlin fiercely bit Shin Yu's lips. "Wait for me to come back." After tidying up his clothes, Shang Junlin walked out. Eunuch Meng followed behind and wondered, "Didn't you just arrive? Why does your Majesty look so unhappy?" Shin Yu lay on the bed for a while, then slowly got up and tidied up his clothes. Mu Shi came in to serve after receiving Shang Junlin's orders. She was stunned when she saw Shin Yu. "What's wrong?" As soon as she spoke, Shin Yu felt a little pain on his lips and subconsciously reached out to touch it. "Young master's lips are bleeding. I'll go get the ointment." Mu Shi finished speaking and walked out. Their things were not completely tidied up, and some of them were outside. Shin Yu put down his hand. Sure enough, there was blood on his hand. He stuck out his tongue and licked it. The faint taste of blood filled his mouth, and there was a tingling sensation on his lips. Mu Shi quickly came in with the ointment. This ointment was also prescribed by Imperial Physician Gu, but it was different from the ointment used there. Shang Junlin liked to leave all kinds of marks on his body every time, and it was difficult to disappear without applying ointment for a long time. It looked very scary, so Shang Junlin asked Imperial Physician Gu to make a special ointment. It was very cooling when applied to his lips. Shin Yu wanted to go out for a walk, but he thought about his current appearance and decided not to. He simply took a book and sat down to read, waiting for the strange feeling on his body to dissipate before going out. It was Mu Shi's first time here, and everything was very new to her. Shin Yu did not intend to restrict her, and waved his hand to let her go out to play. This time, when they left the palace, most of the people they brought with them were palace servants who served in the Jade Gate Palace. Ever since Shin Yu entered the palace, Shang Junlin had never stayed anywhere else, so the people of the Jade Gate Palace were more handy. Shang Junlin was busier. The autumn hunt was not only a time for the emperor and the ministers to relax, but also a kind of alternative assessment. Especially for the young officials and generals, if they could hunt enough game, it was also a good opportunity to show off in front of His Majesty. They rubbed their fists and palms in anticipation of the upcoming hunt, eager to give it a try. Before the start of the hunt, Shang Junlin, as the emperor, would say a few words of encouragement, set the rewards, and shoot the first arrow to symbolize a good omen for this year. The juniors of the ministers' families could also participate in the hunt. If they could perform well in the hunt and leave a good impression on His Majesty, it could not be better. Young people were always the main force of the competition. Shang Junlin had always been generous, and the winner would receive a generous reward. Not only could they leave a good impression on His Majesty, but they could also receive a large reward. For the participants, it was a profitable business. Shin Yu, as the legitimate son of Count North, was fully qualified to participate in the hunt. However, he had never come even once. Every time he came, he would be asked to stay at home by Count North with the excuse of poor health. Shin Yu laughed at himself. How could concubine Ru give him a chance to climb up? She wished that he could not do anything and be suppressed by her good son. Shin Yu stood not far away, watching the man surrounded by the ministers. Hearing the man's steady and powerful voice through the breeze, his heart was faintly warm. This man was his. While he was distracted, a shadow fell in front of him. Shin Yu looked up. Shang Junlin had ridden in front of him and was looking down at him. "Do you want to ride with me, Yu?" The man stretched out his hand and invited him. Shin Yu's mind flashed with the image of the two of them fooling around on horseback. He shook his head and refused. "Did your Majesty bring my white horse?" Shang Junlin stared at him for a while and frowned. "You don't want to ride with me? It's the same if I ride with your Majesty. Otherwise, Wu Kuang will be angry." Shin Yu laughed. Shang Junlin made a gesture. Not long after, the familiar white horse appeared in Shin Yu's sight. Shin Yu took the reins and mounted the horse. "I still like the feeling of riding with your Majesty." Shang Junlin did not comment. He did not point out that Shin Yu was shy because of what happened last time. "Your Majesty, have you seen Shin Qingran in the autumn hunt before?" Shin Yu looked at the man riding with him. Your troublesome concubine-born brother. Shang Junlin thought for a while. Count North brought him here before. I don't have any impression of him. But since I know now, I'll take away his salary for a few years. Chapter 155. Shin Yu couldn't help but laugh. What are you laughing at? Shang Junlin's fingers moved slightly. He wanted to pinch Shin Yu's face. Why did your majesty suddenly think of punishing Sir Jinbei? Shin Yu's voice was still smiling. It happened before. I'm afraid Sir Jinbei didn't expect that your majesty would bring up the past. It's about you. There's no such thing as past. I'll let them pay back the pain they inflicted on you little by little. He didn't say anything because it wasn't the best time yet. Sir Jinbei cares about his face the most. After this incident, he will only hate Shin Qingran more. Shin Yu could imagine what Sir Jinbei was thinking. He would definitely think that if there was no Shin Qingran and his son, he wouldn't be separated from his legitimate eldest son. No matter whether his legitimate eldest son developed in the court or entered the harem, it could bring great benefits to the Lord Protector's manor. He wouldn't have to worry about the revenge from his legitimate eldest son every day like now. They were supposed to be the closest people, but they almost became enemies because of others' instigation. Didn't Sir Jinbei want to get benefits from Shin Yu? Of course, he wanted to, but Shin Yu's performance made him feel uncertain, so he didn't dare to go too far. After all, it was true that he was neglected for more than 10 years before entering the palace. It was also true that he let his concubines and illegitimate sons bully him. It was also true that he didn't care about him. If he didn't resolve these resentments, how could Sir Jinbei dare to get benefits from Shin Yu? On the surface, Shin Yu didn't fall out with others. Occasionally, he would give some advice. Shang Junlin would also reward him from time to time. But that level of reward was far from what a true doting person should give. Sir Jinbei knew that this was because the two directly entered Yuzhang Palace. What the Lord Protector's manor got was just a superficial thing. The more Shin Yu was favored, the more complicated Sir Jinbei's mood was. Facing the compliments of outsiders, he felt proud on one side, but also like his heart was stabbed by knives. Shin Yu knew how much Duke Jinbei had been tortured. What he wanted was this effect. He had tasted it since he was a child. He should let Duke Jinbei have a taste of it. Why would you suddenly ask me if I've seen your younger brother? The contestants had already entered the forest to hunt. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin walked leisurely on the path in the forest. The guards were far behind them so that no one would disturb them. I just suddenly remembered that he used to talk to me about hunting. He said that your majesty was very brave. I thought that your majesty had seen him before. Shin Yu's tone was a little lazy. Is you jealous? Shang Junlin chuckled. Knowing that her majesty is coveted by others, I'm really unhappy. Shin Yu said calmly. He didn't think there was anything to hide. We are very happy, you. The light in the man's eyes suddenly brightened. His eyes, which were as deep as the night sky, stared at Shin Yu without blinking. It was as if he wanted to suck him in. This time, Duke Jinbei didn't bring anyone with him, right? Shin Yu felt uncomfortable being stared at. He turned his head and looked to the other side. Shang Junlin nodded. This time, only Duke Jinbei came from the Duke Jinbei's residence. Let's not talk about him. Let's hunt. Looking at the small animals running by from time to time, Shin Yu was a little tempted. You, what do you want? We will hunt it for you. At this moment, a gray rabbit appeared in the grass in front of them. Whoosh, two sounds of something piercing through the air sounded one after the other. The rabbit was nailed to the ground. The people waiting on the side quickly dismounted and picked up the rabbit. How is it? Shang Junlin asked faintly. Your Majesty, the rabbit was hit by 2 arrows. Needless to say, they also saw the 2 arrows. One went through the rabbit's eyes, killing it in one shot, and the other went through the rabbit's calf. One went up and one went down, firmly nailing the rabbit to the ground. The arrow that went through the rabbit's calf was shot by Shinyu. Shinyu put down the bow and rubbed his wrist. This young body had been pampered for too long. It was even more tiring than in his previous life. Shang Junlin looked at the rabbit. This is a use. Your Majesty, everything that you hunt is mine. Shinyu pointed at the rabbit. The bodyguards following them didn't know how the two of them interacted in private. They were shocked when they heard this. They secretly thought, Your Majesty is too bold in front of His Majesty. Everything that I hunt is a use. They didn't need to participate in the competition. They rode slowly on the horses in the mountains. Hunting became an incidental thing. At first, Shinyu was a little rusty. Later, his movements became smoother and his aim became better. The two of them walked and stopped for a while. They had a good harvest. That deer is mine. Shinyu's interest was aroused. There was obvious excitement in his words. Shang Junlin naturally wouldn't compete with him. He was one step behind. He watched Shinyu pull the bow, nock the arrow, and release the arrow. Along with the sound of something breaking through the air, there was the sound of the deer falling to the ground. Shang Junlin didn't have the mind to care about the deer. All his attention was firmly captured by the scene just now. The beauty in red was heroic. Under the riding clothes, the curves of her body were perfectly outlined. Because of the arm that pulled the bow, the shoulder and neck formed a perfect arc. At this moment, Shinyu was completely different from the young man Shang Junlin was familiar with. He bloomed with all the radiance. It was so dazzling that people couldn't take their eyes off him. Your Majesty, look. Shinyu turned around and bumped into the man's deep eyes. A Yu is very powerful. Shang Junlin's voice was hoarse. Shinyu was about to say something when the sound of horse hooves came from not far away. Then, a rude and unreasonable female voice sounded. This is obviously the prey that I saw first. How can you take it away first? Shinyu raised his eyebrows. The road they chose didn't overlap with the main field. How could there be people coming over? Not long after, a group of people appeared at the place where the deer fell. The leader was a woman in red riding clothes. When the woman saw Shinyu, a touch of surprise flashed in her eyes. After the surprise, it turned into deep jealousy. She wore red because she wanted to be the most outstanding person in the crowd. She didn't expect that the young man in red in this remote place was even more outstanding. They were both red. With just a glance, she knew that she had lost. She had lost completely. Jealousy was like a poisonous snake gnawing at her heart. The woman's face turned cold. You stole my prey. How should I compensate you? She was so focused on destroying the person in front of her that she didn't notice that something was wrong around her. Shang Junlin's clothes were embroidered with dark dragon patterns. If the woman's attention was focused on the surroundings, she would have noticed that something was wrong. Unfortunately, she didn't. Her eyes fell on Shinyu's face, as if she wanted to tear his face off. Shinyu frowned slightly. The woman's malice was too obvious. He couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. He turned his head and saw Shang Junlin pursing his lips, suppressing the anger in his heart. Your Majesty, do you know who that person is? Shinyu lowered his voice and asked. The leader of the group of people was obviously the woman in red. There were no other men around except for the guards. Shinyu was sure that he had never seen this person before. Her malice towards him seemed to be purely out of jealousy. Combined with her surprise at first sight, it was most likely because of his face. Shen Yu touched his face. He never thought that one day he would be hated by a strange woman because of his face. She should be a family member of a minister. Affected by his master's mood, Wu Qiang restlessly paced back and forth. Sister, this deer was shot by that young master. It should be that young master's prey. Ah. The woman in green beside the woman tried to persuade her, but she was pushed off the horse by the woman. Is my business something that you, a concubine's daughter, have the right to care about? The people around the woman turned a blind eye to this situation. Obviously, they were used to the woman's domineering behavior. Shen Yu pulled Shang Junlin's sleeve and interrupted him. He deliberately said in a provocative tone, "It's obviously my prey. How can it be yours just because you say it's yours? If we didn't chase it until it was exhausted, how could you shoot it?" The woman disdainfully said. She didn't just want the prey now. She also wanted to take the opportunity to destroy Shen Yu. Well, if you are willing to take the initiative to admit your mistake, I will not pursue your fault. Shen Yu smiled. Hunting is a matter of first come, first served. It doesn't matter if this deer was driven here by you or it was originally here. Now that my arrow hit it, it is mine. When Shen Yu smiled, his beauty was even more soul-stirring. People who were familiar with him would know that under his beautiful smile, there was a rising anger. Do you really want to go against me? The woman saw Shen Yu smile and only felt more dazzling. How about this? You and I have a competition. If I lose, the deer is yours. If you lose, you take the initiative to admit your mistake and withdraw from this hunting competition. How about it? Of course, I can't let others help me. I will compete with you personally. As a 7 feet tall man, don't you dare to compete with a weak woman. You are not qualified to ask him to leave. Shang Junlin suppressed his anger and said. If Shen Yu didn't stop him, he would have let people drag the woman away. Are you and him a couple? Why are you so protective of him? The woman diverted a little attention to the man in black beside the red-clothed young man. The woman came to the capital with her father because of the change of power in the imperial court. In her original place, her father was the highest official in the local area, and her mother was born in the head of the local aristocratic family. She was the only legitimate daughter in the family. Since she was young, she could get whatever she wanted. She had developed a domineering temperament, and no one dared to disobey her. The green-clothed woman fell to the ground and silently broke out in a cold sweat for the 2 people in front of her. She was well aware of how ruthless her older sister was. Before she came to the capital, there were many servant girls in the residence who were slightly more beautiful that had fallen under her hands. Not only maidservants, if there were women in other families who were more beautiful than her, disfigurement was a better result. If it was more serious, their reputation would be ruined, and even worse, they would die after being humiliated. She opened her mouth and wanted to remind the 2 people in front of her not to provoke her legitimate sister. But she couldn't even protect herself. How could she help others? How ridiculous it was to say that she, a concubine's daughter, was not qualified to meddle in her affairs. But she should be the legitimate daughter. It was her sister, the mother and son, who took everything away from her. This was something they were well aware of. The woman in black lowered her head, and Shen Yu caught the flash of hatred in her eyes. Shen Yu was not interested in the grievances between the 2 sisters. You don't have to worry about the relationship between me and him. As for the competition, I don't think I need to agree to your unreasonable request for the prey that originally belonged to me, right? The woman originally planned to do something in the competition, and it would be better to hurt the face. The woman rode her horse to the side of the deer that fell on the ground. In this case, I won't be polite and will take the prey. I will return the arrow to you. After saying this, the woman bent down to pull the arrow. If you dare to touch my things, do you believe that I will directly let go? Shin-yu pulled the bow to the full and aimed at the woman. His eyes slightly narrowed. My arrow doesn't care whether the target is prey or a person. Chapter 156. The woman's movements slowly stopped. Through his slightly cold eyes, she clearly realized that the young man was not lying. The sharp tip of the arrow was pointed at her. It seemed that as long as she moved again, the other party would let go of his hand and let the cold arrow break through the air and shoot towards her. The expression on her face also froze. A chill climbed up her back and her hair stood on end. A huge crisis shrouded her head. She wanted to say a few harsh words, but she couldn't say a word. She had been domineering for so many years, but this was the first time she felt threatened by others. For a moment, she was shocked and angry. Her hatred for the young man reached its peak. She had never been treated like this. She had never been wronged like this. In fear, the woman didn't dare to pull the arrow. She didn't really care about her life. If she was hurt because of a momentary pleasure, the loss would outweigh the gain. But she couldn't just let it go. She would remember this account and settle it in the future. Didn't he point the arrow at her? When it fell into her hands, she wanted to see if the young man could still maintain his current expression when his cheek was scratched by the arrow. The woman gave up her original action and slowly sat up straight. She urged the horse to retreat a few steps and leave the shooting range. She said, "This is under the Emperor's feet. Do you really dare to shoot me?" Shin-yu slowly turned the direction and pointed the sniper at her again. "You can try. See if I dare." He had nothing to fear. The woman heard these words from his behavior and tone. She didn't dare to do anything else, but her mouth refused to forgive him. How can you easily hurt people under the Emperor's feet? If you really hurt me today, can you leave unharmed? Didn't you do the same thing? Shin-yu glanced at the woman in green who was still sitting on the ground. What? You can get away with hurting people, but I have to be punished for hurting people. She is just a concubine's daughter. If she is hurt, then she is hurt. Can anyone complain for her? The woman raised her head and said with disdain. If you hurt me, my father won't let you go. Then you have to have a chance to complain. Don't you think so? As if to confirm Shin-yu's words, the guards behind them looked at the woman with murderous eyes. What are you trying to do? The woman was terrified. There are so many of us. Are you going to kill all of us? This place is far away from the main road. Shin-yu looked around. Even if something happens, no one will find out in a short time. Not many people know that you came here, right? The woman bit her lips. The young man was right. She had indeed chased after her prey. Her goal was to obtain good results and show her face in front of His Majesty. She had heard that His Majesty liked red, so she purposely wore red today. She did not expect to meet someone who was better than her in every aspect. She looked at the young man again and realized that he was not lying. He really wanted to kill her. At this moment, the sound of hooves could be heard from the forest. The noises of people were getting closer and closer. Are you sure the young lady went this way? A dignified male voice sounded. This servant is sure. Young miss chased a fox over here. Master, it's over there. Young miss is over there. As he got closer, he could vaguely hear their conversation. Hearing the familiar voice, the woman's face lit up. Her suppressed arrogance was reignited. Fox. Shin-yu smiled faintly. I shot a deer. How could there be a fox nearby? The woman pursed her lips. Of course, she knew that the fox had run away. Saying that sentence was just an excuse to get the deer. While they were talking, the people on the other side had already walked towards them. Seeing the two sides faintly confronting each other, the middle-aged man was stunned. What's going on? Someone just called the deer a fox and wanted to extort the deer I shot. Shin Yu had already put down his bow. He did not really intend to do anything to the woman. Father, they stole my prey and wanted to hurt me. You have to get justice for your daughter. How can two men bully a weak woman? The woman saw that her backer had come. She was full of energy, and her eyes flashed with a touch of insidiousness. She would get back the face she had just lost 1,000 times. The middle-aged man frowned and looked to the other side. He wanted to say something, but after seeing who was opposite, he suddenly closed his mouth. Of all the people to provoke, why did they have to provoke the two most untouchable people in Dahuan? The man did not dare to delay. He jumped off his horse, walked a few steps forward, and respectfully knelt down. This official greets your majesty. Father, what are you doing? The woman covered her mouth in shock. She could not believe what she had heard. What was her father saying? The person opposite was the emperor. Su Darren has taught his daughter well. Shang Junlin's tone was light. Su Darren's forehead was covered in sweat. His whole body was tense. If the emperor did not ask him to stand up, he did not dare to stand up. He maintained his kneeling position and did not move. It was not easy for him to be transferred to the capital. It was very likely that today's matter would be ruined. The others did not dare to stay on their horses. No matter if they were sitting or standing, they all crawled and fell to their knees. Their foreheads touched the ground, and they did not dare to breathe. They never thought that their first meeting with the emperor would be under such circumstances. The woman's face was completely white. No matter how unwilling she was to believe it, she had to admit that the person opposite her was the emperor of Dahuan. What did she do? The woman knelt on the ground, her body trembling uncontrollably. She did such a thing in front of the emperor. She did not dare to think of the consequences. Su Darren did not teach his daughter well. There is no need to rush to take office. As for your good daughter, Shang Junlin looked at the woman with disgust. She spoke rudely to Zhen and the emperor. Punish her according to the law. Punish according to the law. That would be taking his daughter's life. Su Darren thought of his wife at home and had to plead. I beg your majesty to give her a way out. My daughter is young and ignorant. She did not know the identity of your majesty and the emperor. This official only has one daughter, so it is inevitable that she has been spoiled. I beg your majesty to be lenient. This humble girl really did not know. The Su family's daughter kowtowed. If this humble girl knew that it was your majesty and the emperor, even if this humble girl had 10,000 guts, this humble girl would not dare to be disrespectful. So you are saying that if your majesty and I did not have our current identities, we would be bullied by others? Shin Yu coldly sneered. Then can I guess that Miss Su has done such things before? After speaking, Shin Yu turned to Shang Junlin. Your majesty, why don't we investigate together? Otherwise, there will be people who say that I do not tolerate people in my eyes. When I see someone trying to get close to your majesty, I will kill them. I cannot bear such a reputation. The emperor's words are reasonable. We will do as the emperor says. Meng Chang, go and issue the decree. Eunuch Meng, who had been following the crowd, walked out. This servant receives the decree. At this moment, Lord Su felt his vision turning dark. He never expected that his daughter would cause such a huge disaster. If he knew about this earlier, he would have strictly watched his daughter back in Hangzhou City to prevent her from developing such an arrogant character. But now, it was too late to say anything. Lord Su still did not know that his daughter, who he thought was just a little arrogant, would bring him a huge surprise. No one dared to slack off when Shang Junlin ordered an investigation. Hangzhou City wasn't far from the capital. After the imperial decree was issued, officials immediately set off from the capital to Hangzhou City to investigate the truth. The Su family's daughter was locked up. When Lord Su returned, Madame Su came up to him. When she saw the green-clothed woman following behind Lord Su and her daughter missing, a bad premonition arose in her heart. Why are you the only ones back? Where's Junjun? Madame Su suppressed the panic in her heart and tried her best to ask in a calm voice. Lord Su wore an unsightly expression. He knew how much his wife doted on his daughter, so he had no idea how to explain to her about what had just happened. Seeing that Lord Su's expression wasn't good, Madame Su became even more flustered. She turned to look at the green-clothed woman and gave her a slap. You're back, but your sister isn't. Didn't I say that you have to be wherever she is? Knitting his brows, Lord Su replied, Why did you slap her? She can't do anything about this matter. The green-clothed woman held onto her face and tilted her head to the side. A brief moment later, she chuckled. Slowly, her laughter grew louder and louder. What are you laughing about? Madame Su, don't you know your own daughter's temperament? It's not like you don't know how many high-ranking officials and nobles can come to the autumn hunt. You don't know how many of them have outstanding looks. With Su Wanjuan's temperament, if she met those people, what do you think she would do? Madame Su's eyes flickered. Which noble did she get into a conflict with? The green-clothed woman ignored Madame Su's words and continued, This isn't Hangzhou City, and it's not a place where you can do whatever you want. What do you think the consequences will be if she continues to act as she did in the past? The green-clothed woman lowered her hand, and there was an obvious palm print on her face. Think about what your daughter has done. His Majesty has ordered for a thorough investigation. Not only her, but the disgusting things you did in the past will soon be announced to the world. My poor mother can finally rest in peace. Why are you dragging others into Junjun's matter? Lord Su was displeased. Nonsense. Take the second miss away. Without my orders, no one is allowed to let her out. After the green-clothed woman was taken away, Lord Su told Madame Su everything that happened today. When Madame Su heard it, her vision turned dark. The matter here didn't affect the hunt. In the evening, the participants returned with their prey. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin returned to the camp earlier. After being disturbed, Shen Yu didn't have the mood to continue. Shang Junlin originally wanted to accompany him. When he saw that Shen Yu wasn't in a good mood, he simply brought him back. Next time, I'll send people to guard the surroundings to prevent people who don't have eyes from barging in. Shang Junlin said as he massaged Shen Yu's wrist. Shen Yu rarely exercised so much. He didn't feel it earlier, but when he relaxed, he only felt that his wrist hurt badly. Shang Junlin took out an ointment and massaged him. As the cool feeling seeped into his skin, the soreness was effectively relieved. Shen Yu moved his fingers. Why is your Majesty so overbearing? It's better than people who don't have eyes to make you unhappy. Shang Junlin put away the ointment and pulled Shen Yu to stand up. Let's go, they should be back soon. The sky gradually darkened, and a bonfire was lit in the open space. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and walked out. Does your Majesty know how to roast meat? Later, your Majesty will roast meat for me. Roast the deer that I hunted today, okay? Lord Su and Madame Su, who were approaching, happened to hear this sentence. When Madame Su knew that the cause of her daughter's misfortune was the deer, her face instantly became ugly. Chapter 157. Lord Su's mood was also very complicated. Anyone whose daughter had committed a crime would not feel good to see the person who caused it speak as if no one else was present. But he could not say anything. His daughter made the mistake first. He could not blame His Majesty for it, and he did not dare to. Shang Junlin had a reputation, and all the officials were afraid of him, especially officials like Lord Su who had been working outside the capital and had only heard about His Majesty's actions from others. It was not a secret that Shang Junlin used bloody means to force the previous emperor to abdicate. Lord Su had been working outside for many years, but it did not mean that he did not have any connections in the capital. Otherwise, he would not have been transferred back to the capital this time. As an official, who did not want to stay in the center of power. In comparison, Madame Su was not so afraid of Shang Junlin. She was a woman and had been doted on by her family since she was young. After she got married, her husband also listened to her. It could be said that her life had been smooth sailing and she had not encountered any setbacks. Until today. Knowing his wife's temperament, Lord Su pulled her sleeve and whispered, "That is His Majesty and Gui Jun." As they spoke, they got closer and closer. "Greetings, Your Majesty and Gui Jun." Lord Su knelt down and saluted. Madame Su followed suit. Shang Junlin looked at them from above for a while. Just as Lord Su's back was faintly covered in cold sweat, he spoke. "Rise." Lord Su hurriedly pulled his wife up and watched Shang Junlin and Shin Yu leave. "The person walking with His Majesty is Gui Jun. Does His Majesty dote on him a lot?" Madame Su looked at the backs of the two people leaving. "Yes." Before he entered the palace, His Majesty gave him the title of Gui Jun. After entering the palace, he was doted on even more. His Majesty even announced to the public that he would only have Gui Jun in his life. Lord Su sighed. Gui Jun is a man. Won't the officials object to His Majesty's words? How can they not object? Who doesn't want to send their daughter to the palace to fight for a future? But what's the use of objecting? His Majesty has decided that he only wants Gui Jun and has punished several officials for this. In order to divert Madame Su's attention and dispel some thoughts in her heart, Lord Su deliberately said a few more words. "Really?" Retracting her gaze, Mrs. Su changed the topic. "Do you have a way to contact Hangzhou City in the shortest time possible? Why are you contacting them? Don't worry. Even if His Majesty sends someone to investigate, they won't find anything." After the initial panic, Lord Su was no longer as panicked as before. No matter what, he had been in Hangzhou for a long time, and everyone there was his people. So what if His Majesty sent officials to investigate? If they could find anything, how could he be transferred to the capital? What should we do about Junjun? Madame Su's heart ached at the thought of her daughter. "I'll think of a way to deal with Junjun." Lord Su patted Madame Su's hand. Before the imperial edict was officially announced, some officials came over to greet Lord Su. Lord Su didn't dare to reveal anything, so he pretended to be happy and chatted with the officials. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin first went to the place where the game was piled up. They had a good harvest from this trip. There were rabbits, roe deer, all kinds of game. What else does a Yu want to eat besides deer meat? Roasted rabbit. Shin Yu pointed out a few things, which the palace servants took away. After they were done, they only needed to roast the meat. It was bustling outside. People were constantly returning from the three forests with their game. They were in groups of 2 or 3 as they complemented each other. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin held hands as they walked on the grass. They didn't go to crowded places, and no one would disturb them. It was late autumn, and the temperature was low at night. Shin Yu wore a cloak, but he could still feel the chill seeping in. Shang Junlin touched Shin Yu's hand, which was getting colder, and gave up on the idea of walking out. Approaching the bonfire, Shin Yu couldn't help wanting to get closer to the bonfire. The competition would last for 3 days, and it was only the first day. After the people in charge of counting the game, everyone could gather and enjoy the delicacies they hunted during the day. The palace servants served the processed meat. Shin Yu supported his chin with one hand as he looked at the man's handsome side profile. The fire jumped, and the man who was seriously roasting the meat had a touch of smoke. It was hard to imagine that the hands used to hold a brush and kill enemies could be used to do something so down-to-earth. Shang Junlin skillfully roasted the meat. After a while, the meat slices made a sizzling sound, and a strong aroma wafted out. Shin Yu's nose twitched, and his eyes fell on Shang Junlin's hand. "It smells so good. Are you hungry? It'll be ready in a while." The aroma was getting stronger. Shang Junlin put the roasted meat on a plate and handed it to Shin Yu. "Try it." After drying for a while, Shin Yu was sure that the meat was not so hot. He picked up a piece and put it into his mouth. He chewed it quickly and swallowed it. Shin Yu ate the whole piece of meat and said in surprise, "Your Majesty's cooking is really beyond my expectations. It's so delicious." Shin Yu asked Shang Junlin to roast the meat for him simply because he wanted to eat the meat roasted by Shang Junlin. If he could swallow it, he could praise it with his eyes closed. Who knew that the meat roasted by Shang Junlin was so delicious? He didn't know how to praise it. Seeing that Shin Yu liked it, Shang Junlin roasted a few more pieces. Different types of meat tasted different. The only thing they had in common was how delicious they were. Shin Yu was originally a person who liked good food. He accidentally ate too much and felt a little uncomfortable. They roasted more than half of the venison and several rabbits. Shang Junlin roasted most of it himself, and some of it went into Shin Yu's stomach. Some of it was roasted by the palace servants, and some went into Shang Junlin's stomach. Shin Yu also roasted the meat a few times. The first time, the meat was burnt. The second time, the meat was not cooked. After several failures, Shin Yu gave up. Shin Yu rubbed his stomach and looked at the unfinished roasted meat. He was in a dilemma. There is still so much left to eat. Even if the weather was cold, the meat would not be fresh until tomorrow. Give some to the palace servants and some to the ministers. That should be enough, Shang Junlin said. After receiving the order, the palace servants distributed the roasted meat. The Prime Minister, Fong Darren, and other ministers who were highly regarded by Shang Junlin could all get a share. Roasted meat was nothing, but it symbolized the importance of the emperor to his ministers. Let's not talk about the thoughts of those who received the roasted meat and those who didn't. Shin Yu ate the meat roasted by Shang Junlin. The price was that he had to go outside to digest the food at night. "If I don't look after you, you will feel more uncomfortable now." Shang Junlin put one arm around Shin Yu's waist to support his weight. His tone was somewhat helpless. "The meat roasted by Your Majesty is not something that can be eaten casually," Shin Yu said while savoring the aftertaste. If it was not so delicious, he would not have eaten so much. Deer meat and deer blood are very nutritious. I will ask Imperial Physician Gu to prescribe some medicine to clear the heat in your body. Shang Junlin was very happy that the food he cooked was liked by his lover. Shin Yu thought of this in hindsight and widened his eyes. "How much did I eat just now?" Shang Junlin calculated and gave the answer, "Quite a lot. Compared to other kinds of meat, you obviously prefer deer meat." Shin Yu would indeed choose what he liked to eat more when he ate. He thought about it. It seemed that, probably, he really ate a lot. No wonder I feel so warm now. I am not cold at all. Shin Yu felt that even if the wind blew, he would not feel cold. "What about Your Majesty? Did Your Majesty eat a lot of deer meat just now?" Shin Yu stopped. "I am not picky about meat. Let's see what meat you put in my bowl." Shang Junlin was responsible for roasting the meat for Shin Yu. When Shin Yu ate, he did not forget Shang Junlin. Half of the meat was in his mouth, and the other half was in Shang Junlin's mouth. Shang Junlin had a big appetite. Shen Yu wanted to roast the meat for him. However, the meat he roasted was a failure. He could only ask the palace servants to roast the meat and then feed it to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin was very easy to serve when it came to food. Basically, he ate whatever Shen Yu fed him. Your Majesty also drank deer blood. Shen Yu thought about the possible consequences of drinking deer meat and deer blood. Let's walk outside before going back. If he had known, he would not have been so greedy. Shen Yu did not want to have to stay in the tent because of various reasons on the second day of the autumn hunt. With Shang Junlin's physical strength and the effect of deer blood, Shen Yu did not dare to think about the consequences. We have to wait until you are not so full before going back to rest. Shang Junlin did not express his opinion. The sky was completely dark. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin walked behind the tent. On the other side, the ministers gathered with their families around the bonfire. The gap between their identities was not as obvious as usual. It was a rare opportunity to relax. The ministers no longer talked about government affairs. Instead, they talked about what they had seen and heard during the day, about the game each family had hunted, or about finding a partner for their children. The young people who performed well in the autumn hunt could not only leave a good impression in front of the emperor, but also obtain a good marriage. Su Darren and Madame Su originally wanted to use this opportunity to find a good husband for their daughter. Now, not to mention their daughter, even their own ability to stay in the capital was a problem. Naturally, they did not have this thought. Madame Su did not show any abnormality and chatted with the other madams warmly. The night gradually grew late. After everyone finished eating and drinking, they went back to rest. Su Darren turned his head and did not find his wife. He was about to send someone to look for her when he saw Madame Su hurriedly walk over. Where did you go? I just drank wine and felt a bit stuffy. I went to a place with fewer people to get some fresh air. Su Darren did not suspect her. The banquet is over. Let's go back and rest. Okay. Madame Su was relieved that he did not suspect her. After Shen Yu digested the food, he went back to the tent with Shang Junlin. He was worried that the man would take the opportunity to do something. He did not expect that Shang Junlin would behave himself until he fell asleep. He did not cross the line at all. Shen Yu did not feel anything wrong with his body. He finally relaxed and slowly fell asleep. In the middle of the night, he was woken up by the heat. It was as if he had been thrown into a furnace. He felt hot from the inside out. Shen Yu pulled his clothes and lifted the quilt. His movements were not small. Shang Junlin noticed that something was wrong almost as soon as he began to move. His arm was originally placed on the young man's waist, but the young man impatiently pushed it away because of the heat. His clothes were opened, but the heat did not subside. Instead, it became more and more intense. Shen Yu struggled to open his eyes. He only felt that he had fallen from one illusion to another. You? Shen Yu grabbed the man's outstretched hand. The heat was relieved. As if he had been inspired, he chased the man's arm and rubbed against the man's chest. He heard the man's slightly smiling voice above his head. You took the initiative to throw yourself into my arms. After you wake up, goody, you can't blame me. Chapter 158. The next day, Shen Yu was unable to get up, just as he had initially feared. After waking up, Shen Yu wanted to sit up, but when he moved, he pulled on a certain part of his body. It was so painful that he softly hissed and fell back down. His entire body was aching from every part of his body. Shen Yu lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling with a somewhat listless gaze. Although a large part of the reason for last night was because of him, Shen Yu was still not very happy. No matter how he thought about it, Shang Junlin was waiting for him, and he was the rabbit that delivered itself to his door. The movements on the bed were heard outside. After a while, Shang Junlin walked in. Behind him were two palace maids, each holding something in their hands. As soon as the steaming hot food came in, Shen Yu smelled the aroma floating out. His single stomach unconsciously made a rumbling sound. Shang Junlin walked to the bedside. The palace maids put down the things in their hands and quietly retreated. "Did your majesty do it on purpose last night?" Shen Yu asked in a hoarse voice. "Jin didn't do anything last night," Shang Junlin complained for himself. "You took the initiative to throw himself into my arms. Jin couldn't possibly reject you." Shen Yu was helped to sit up. His body was very dry. It seemed that the man had washed him. "Drink some water first." Shang Junlin brought the warm water to Shen Yu's mouth. Shen Yu lowered his head and drank the water from Shang Junlin's hand. His throat finally felt a little better and his voice was not as hoarse as before. "Did your majesty deliberately let me eat so much venison?" Shen Yu glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. At this moment, Shen Yu's face was still red and the corners of his eyes were red. When he looked over, it only made Shang Junlin more excited. Shang Junlin shifted his legs and said without batting an eyelid, "Jin also roasted other meat." It was a Yu who had a special liking for venison. Of course, Shang Junlin wouldn't tell Shen Yu that before feeding him, he had specifically asked Imperial Physician Gu to let Shen Yu eat without restraint. In fact, the amount of meat was strictly controlled by him. Shen Yu couldn't refute this statement. Indeed, it was up to him to choose what meat to eat. Shang Junlin chuckled. "A Yu was really passionate last night. I couldn't stop myself even if I wanted to." Shen Yu reached out to cover his mouth. Her porcelain skin was stained with red plum blossoms. Shang Junlin looked at the marks he left behind and gulped. "We won't talk anymore. Have some porridge first. Are you hungry?" Shang Junlin lowered his voice. Seeing his dark eyes, Shen Yu didn't dare to provoke him anymore. Last night, the venison had an effect. If he did it again today, his waist and legs would be gone. "I'm hungry." Shen Yu retracted his hand and slowly wrapped himself in the quilt. No matter how much Shang Junlin thought about it, it was impossible for him to really do anything to her now. Last night, Shen Yu wasn't awake, but he was. At that level, if not for the dear blood and meat, Shen Yu wouldn't have done it. What's more, he also ate the venison. Although he was conscious, he was still somewhat affected. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to grab the youth's ankle and drag him back to continue. Shang Junlin closed his eyes and suppressed the churning images in his mind. He took the porridge and slowly fed it to Shen Yu. Shen Yu was so tired that he didn't even bother to lift his arms. He enjoyed the service of the emperor with a clear conscience. Shen Yu was indeed hungry. The porridge also suited his appetite. Not long after, he finished the bowl of porridge and felt full. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Shen Yu finally had the mind to think about other things. What time is it now? Have the hunters already gone out? Shang Junlin told him the time. As Shen Yu expected, it was already noon. Last night, they played until dawn before Shen Yu begged them to stop. It wasn't strange for Shen Yu to sleep until now. Your Majesty didn't go out today. Shen Yu looked at Shang Junlin. The man was still wearing a narrow-sleeved black robe today. His hair was tied up high. He didn't wear the crown that symbolized his status as an emperor. He only used a jade crown engraved with dragon patterns to hold his hair in place. A Yu is here. Where can I go? Compared to hunting, Shang Junlin wanted to stay with Shen Yu more. Shinyu didn't wake up. If he went out and the first person Shinyu saw when he woke up wasn't him, Shinyu wouldn't be happy. He heard people say that after making out, if the other party didn't accompany you when you woke up in the morning, it would be irresponsible. Apart from these reasons, Shang Junlin also wanted to stay by Shinyu's side. In his heart, he wanted to be the first person Shinyu saw when he woke up. Knowing Shinyu's habit, Shang Junlin took the clothes on the side. Do you want me to help you wear them or do you want me to wear them yourself? Shinyu moved a little. His body didn't have much strength, so he decisively gave up. He had no qualms about ordering the culprit who caused all this. Your Majesty, please help me. Shang Junlin unfolded the clothes and pulled Shinyu out of the quilt. Even though it was noon, the mountain was still a little cold. Shinyu shivered a little. The next moment, he was embraced by the man. Except for the hot summer, Shinyu liked to stick close to Shang Junlin. The man's body temperature was on the high side. For Shinyu, who was afraid of cold, hugging him was very comfortable. Shang Junlin lifted Shinyu's arm and helped him put on the coat. After putting on the coat, Shinyu found that Shang Junlin gave him an icy blue robe with large sleeves. Thinking about it, it seemed that he couldn't ride a horse today. Not only today, it was very likely that he couldn't ride a horse for the next few days. His legs were soft and without any strength. Shinyu originally wanted to go out for a walk, but he had to give up. Shang Junlin wanted to carry him out, but Shinyu didn't want to be surrounded by people, so he let it go. In the afternoon, the Prime Minister and Fong Darren came to talk about the matter of Subei. Although it was the autumn hunting season, the daily official business still had to be dealt with. When Shang Junlin stayed in the tent, he spent most of his time reviewing the memorials. Shinyu didn't want to move. Shang Junlin also didn't want to avoid him for these matters, so he listened to them together. He Qingyu, Shin Qingran, and Fang Jie were in Subei. All the internal problems were solved. With the aid of various places, the post-disaster reconstruction went smoothly. When Fang Jun left, everything in Subei was on the right track. The officials sent by the imperial court were also willing to do practical work, so there was no need to worry too much. The only thing they needed to care about was the northern desert. The Prime Minister and Fong Darren came to discuss how to deal with the northern desert. The spies of the northern desert in Subei were all caught in one fell swoop. The leader was also taken to the capital. That person's identity was also found out. He was a member of the Northern Desert royal family and the younger brother of the current ruler of the Northern Desert. This identity meant that they had more bargaining chips in their hands. The more honorable the person's status was, the more advantageous it was for them. The Northern Desert wants to take him back, Fong Darren said. It's not surprising. This person has been lurking in Subei for many years. Just the secrets he knows are enough for the Northern Desert Emperor to think of ways to take him back. The Northern Desert was driven out of Subei that year, and for many years they were unwilling to accept it. They want to reoccupy Subei. On the surface, they are peaceful, but there have been many conflicts with the Subei army. The fact that they have planted so many spies in Subei is enough to show that they haven't given up. The Prime Minister was not surprised. According to our people's secret reports, the Northern Desert has been playing tricks these days. They seem to want to send their troops south again. Fong Darren frowned. Such a big turmoil in Subei is a rare opportunity for them. They have coveted the land of the Great Huan for many years. In the past, they didn't dare to act rashly because they were afraid of your Majesty. However, time is the best way to erase people's fears. Driven by their growing desire, they have chosen to abandon the memory of their defeat. They feel that this is a rare opportunity and they will definitely succeed in one fell swoop. Shinyu expressed his opinion. The Prime Minister and Fong Darren didn't have any thoughts about Shinyu participating in court politics. The Prime Minister had wanted Shinyu to come to court more than once and had even asked His Majesty about it. Hearing Shinyu's words, both of them agreed. The northern desert had always been ambitious and had coveted the Great Huan. They had known for a long time. Be prepared for both sides. If they want to fight, I didn't fear them in the past, and I won't now. Since they were going to face a possible war, the court needed to be prepared in advance. The Prime Minister and Fong Darren accepted the order and went to make arrangements. The Northern Desert. What's the situation in the Great Huan? The Northern Desert Emperor was a man in his 40s. He sat on the throne that represented the throne and looked at the officials below. He was not in a good mood. No one would be in a good mood if the plan that had been in place for many years was uprooted. The Great Huan is still unwilling to let go. In order to save His Highness, all of our forces in Subei were lost. Now, unless the Great Huan is willing to take the initiative to reveal it, we have no way of knowing His Highness's situation. The official trembled as he knelt below, not daring to raise his head. The Subei has just experienced a great drought. The Subei army has also been affected. This is a rare opportunity. Do you think that if we act now, we can catch the Great Huan off guard? The Northern Desert Emperor's gloomy eyes swept over the officials below. There were many newly promoted officials in the Northern Desert Court. They knew very little about the battle that year and didn't know what kind of terrifying force the Subei army was under the leadership of Shang Junlin. The Northern Desert also wouldn't wantonly publicize how tragic the defeat was. Over time, except for a few people, most people didn't take the Subei army seriously. So what if the Subei army is strong? If we didn't deliberately let them win last time, it's not certain who would win. If you ask me, it's better to directly teach them a lesson. The millions of cavalrymen of the Northern Desert are not just for show. These words were approved by most people. After the defeat, the Great Huan will naturally send His Highness back. There were some officials who were not so optimistic, but the Emperor refused to listen to them. The more they said, the easier it was for them to be despised. The autumn hunt was still in progress. Shinyu rested for 2 days and could barely walk freely. The competition was also coming to an end. The winner would get a chance to meet the Emperor, which was a great encouragement for the young people who had not yet entered the officialdom. The winner this time was a young man. He was a child of the collateral branch of the Duan family. As usual, Shang Junlin rewarded him, called him to the front and said a few words of encouragement. When he left, the young man's footsteps were light. Shinyu sat beside Shang Junlin and witnessed the whole process with his own eyes. The Duan family has taught a good child. It was rare that he didn't have the bad habits of the aristocratic families. The banquet was very lively. The young man brought by Grand Secretary Duan won the first prize, which made the aristocratic families proud. An endless stream of people came to congratulate him. Shinyu looked over there and joked, the aristocratic families can hold their heads high this time. They should at least be given some benefits. Shang Junlin held a wine cup and said indifferently. Shinyu looked away and asked curiously, what did your Majesty hunt these 2 days? As far as Shinyu knew, the wives of the ministers in the imperial court were all women. We dismissed a few of them, and no one mentioned this matter again. Shang Junlin was right. There were many people in the imperial court who were curious about Shinyu. Before entering the imperial palace, everyone's impression of him was that he was not favored by Jinbei Ho. After entering the imperial palace, except for the banquet, they had no chance to see him in person. Just the fact that he could firmly grasp the emperor's heart was enough for everyone to have a strong interest in him. Not to mention that the emperor was not willing to accept anyone into the imperial harem because of him. Now, the emperor was sitting in the same carriage as him, going in and out with him. It seemed that the emperor doted on him to the bone. Did the world give up the idea of sending women into the imperial harem? No, as long as the ambition did not disappear, this idea would never be eliminated. They did not mention it now because they knew how to judge the situation and knew that it was not a good time. As long as the emperor's love for Shinyu did not disappear, they could only suppress the idea in their hearts. After the ceremony, Shang Junlin left with Shinyu, who was bored. After they left, the banquet became really lively. The madams and misses who had a good relationship with each other sat together and talked about all kinds of topics. As they chatted, the topic turned to the emperor and the emperor. I have long been curious about what kind of person the emperor is. He can make our emperor, who has never been moved by the mundane, so fascinated that he can't find north. Seeing him today, he is really extraordinary. With such an appearance, there are not many people in the world who can compare to him. His Majesty and the emperor are really. The madam in blue who spoke covered her chest. Why can't my family learn from His Majesty? When the two get along, they really don't put on any airs. His Majesty obviously has true feelings for the emperor. At this point, the person lowered his voice. I just don't know how long this sincerity will last. This is not something we need to worry about. That's also true. However, the emperor's actions are so flamboyant, leaving no room for leeway in everything. Aren't you afraid that in the future? Since ancient times, the emperor was fickle. When he was deeply in love, you were very good. But once the feelings faded, everything in the past could become evidence for him to punish you at will. With His Majesty's temperament, the things you are worried about will most likely not happen. The one who spoke was Madame Fong. With Fong Darren entering the cabinet, Madame Fong's status also rose. Why does Madame Fong say that? The madam who was refuted didn't look very good. His Majesty is not attracted to beauty. If it wasn't for the emperor entering the palace by accident, I'm afraid the harem would still be empty. Since that is the case, how could the things you said happen? Madame Fong spoke neither quickly nor slowly. Shinyu didn't know that the court's women had already begun to worry about him falling out of favor in the future. After returning to the tent, Eunuch Meng presented the booklet. The prey that everyone hunted would be recorded. One's own prey could be disposed of at will. It could be given away or kept for oneself to eat. Shang Junlin hunted a lot of things. Some of them were given out as rewards, but more were kept. His Majesty actually hunted so much. Shinyu was surprised. Shang Junlin spent most of his time in the tent every day. He looked at the booklet. On the first day, they hunted a lot together, but later, they hunted more and more. There was no lack of large ferocious beasts among them. They haven't dealt with this bear yet. When it's done, they will make steamed bear paws for you. It's a pity that they didn't hunt a tiger. They said they would send it to you before, but we can only wait. Shinyu didn't hide the shock on his face. He knew that Shang Junlin was very powerful, but this was the first time he witnessed it. It was rare to see such an expression on Shinyu's face. Shang Junlin felt funny and stroked his face. I hunted it with several generals. Why are you so surprised? His Majesty didn't get hurt, right? Shang Junlin shook his head. It was a coincidence that we were able to hunt that bear. It was originally injured, and it ran into our hunting range in a hurry. It didn't take much effort to kill it. That was a bear. Shinyu knew that no matter how lightly Shang Junlin described it, the situation at that time was definitely not that easy. Even if the bear was injured, unless it was injured to the point where it couldn't move, the strength of a bear was not something that could be easily matched by a human. I really didn't get hurt. Why don't you check it personally? Shinyu didn't say anything and began to take off Shang Junlin's clothes. This time, it became Shang Junlin. You? Shinyu's hands didn't stop moving, and his eyebrows slightly raised. didn't your majesty ask me to check it? Shang Junlin had no choice but to stiffen his body and let Shin Yu check it. Fortunately, there were no new injuries on his body except for the old ones. After Shin Yu finished checking, he casually adjusted his clothes. Your majesty's body is precious. You can't get hurt casually. Shang Junlin didn't care about his carelessly opened clothes and put his arms around Shin Yu. Shin Yu didn't expect his action and fell into his arms. Is you worried about me? Shang Junlin whispered in Shin Yu's ear. His voice was low and contained a smile. Shin Yu's ear itched and moved uncomfortably. What do you think, your majesty? I think so. After saying that, Shang Junlin kissed Shin Yu's trembling earlobe. After resting for 2 days, Shin Yu finally recovered a little. It was very boring to stay in the camp all the time. When Shang Junlin went out to hunt, Shin Yu took the initiative to ask to go with him. Shang Junlin couldn't persuade him, so he asked someone to bring a white horse. Shin Yu didn't come out for a few days. Even his breathing was light as Shin Yu rode the horse on the forest path. Unlike last time, besides the imperial bodyguards, there were also a few ministers, civil officials and military generals. Shin Yu roughly looked at them and guessed that they should be close ministers of Shang Junlin. After walking for a while, everyone dispersed. The leader of the imperial guards followed them, and the other ministers went to other places. They wouldn't move together. First, there were too many of them. Before they could get close, the prey would be scared away. Second, the prey they could hunt was limited. It was better to disperse. The leader of the Imperial Guards followed Shang Junlin. His main duty was to protect him. The Imperial bodyguards accompanying them were also the backbone of the Imperial Guards. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin rode side by side at the front. Without the other ministers, the two of them communicated more privately. After shooting down the running prey again, the leader of the Imperial Guards following behind them had already become numb from the initial shock. He didn't know how those people who spread rumors that His Highness was a sickly person were so blind. He really wanted to let those people see His Highness's valiant posture when hunting. After walking into the depths of the forest, Shin Yu saw the prey and aimed an arrow at it. Whoosh, the prey fell to the ground. When the people accompanying them were about to pick it up, Shin Yu and Shang Junlin said at the same time, "Wait." The horse kicked its hooves uneasily. For a moment, the forest was so quiet that it was almost strange. The wind blew through the forest, and the branches and leaves rustled. The leader of the Imperial Guards made a gesture. The Imperial Guards rode their horses and surrounded Shang Junlin and Shin Yu in the middle to protect them. Buzz, suddenly, the quiet forest became restless. Countless arrows broke through the air and shot toward them. The men in black who were hiding in the bushes appeared at the same time and attacked them with short swords. Shang Junlin didn't think about anything else. He pulled Shin Yu onto Wuquang's back and protected him in his arms. "Protect His Majesty." For a moment, the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. Shin Yu curled up in the man's arms. His heart was extremely calm. This was an assassination that had been planned for a long time. The most difficult thing to deal with were the assassins hiding in the trees. There weren't many of them, but the arrows they shot were impossible to guard against. Shin Yu half crouched on the horse's back and calmly calculated the angle. He didn't have many arrows left, so he had to use every one of them. Now was the time. Shin Yu suddenly turned around, knocked an arrow at the fastest speed, and released it. Bang! The assassins hiding in the trees fell to the ground, splashing a cloud of dust. Fortunately, the assassins hiding in the trees didn't have an endless supply of arrows. After the first wave of arrows ended, they also joined the battle. Without the threat of arrows, it was much easier for the Imperial Guards to deal with these assassins. The Imperial Guards protected Shang Junlin and Shin Yu as they retreated. The other party was well prepared. They faintly surrounded them in the middle. Rush out! Shang Junlin held the reins with one hand on Shen Yu's waist. The other hand was holding a long sword. The sword was stained with the enemy's blood. He looked like the god of death. Shen Yu had been observing the surroundings. He pointed to the weakest spot and said, "Go that way. They couldn't be trapped here." Chapter 160. Realizing their intentions, the enemies gradually gathered towards the weakest areas. "Don't let them escape," the leader of the assassins shouted. Those who were able to follow Shang Junlin were the best of the best. Under the leadership of Shang Junlin, they slaughtered their way out. The silence in the forest was broken. The sound of weapons clashing would attract the attention of others sooner or later. The assassins knew this and needed to end the battle quickly. Shen Yu had used up more than half of the arrows on his body. Shang Junlin held him tightly in front of his chest and was not injured at all. However, the smell of blood lingered in the air. Blood splattered on his body and face. It was the enemy's blood. Shen Yu clung tightly to Shang Junlin. At this time, he could not bring any unnecessary burden to him. He gripped the bow tightly and his knuckles turned white. Every time someone tried to attack Shang Junlin when he was unprepared, they would be killed by him. The two of them cooperated well and there was no danger along the way. The hidden dragon guards who received the secret order appeared in time and the situation was reversed. "Keep them alive. I want to know who ordered them to do this." Shang Junlin rode his horse and looked down at the suppressed assassins. Shen Yu heaved a sigh of relief and relaxed his body. He leaned into Shang Junlin's arms and relaxed his tense nerves. All his strength flowed out like a tide. If Shang Junlin did not hold him tightly, he would have fallen down. Such a big matter could not be concealed. When Shen Yu and Shang Junlin returned to the camp, the officials had already received the news. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin were stained with blood. Many of the guards behind them were injured. Shang Junlin ordered them to take care of the situation. He also brought Shen Yu back to the camp. The assassins were handed over to official Fang. Shang Junlin did not care about the lives of these people. He just wanted to know who ordered them to do this. The palace maids nimbly prepared hot water and clean clothes, and then retreated. Shang Junlin was wearing black clothes. The blood only deepened the color a little. Shen Yu was wearing light clothes. Once blood came into contact with his clothes, it would be very obvious. Shen Yu touched Shang Junlin's clothes. They were all wet. When he let go, his hands were stained with blood. He frowned. "Is your majesty hurt?" "It's all other people's blood." Shang Junlin took off his outer clothes and wiped the blood off Shen Yu's hands with a clean inner shirt. "You protected me. How could I get hurt?" Shen Yu's performance surprised Shang Junlin. It was not easy to remain calm in the face of such a dangerous situation. He was worried that Shen Yu would be frightened, so he protected Shen Yu in his arms and did not let him see the bloody scene. Unexpectedly, he did not feel the slightest fear from Shen Yu. He even avoided several injuries because of Shen Yu's help. "Today, it's all thanks to you." Shang Junlin raised his hand to touch Shen Yu's face. When he saw the blood on his hand, he paused. Shen Yu took the initiative to hold his hand and put it on his face. "With your majesty here, I'm not afraid of anything." Feeling the body under his hand trembling slightly, Shang Junlin's thoughts were interrupted. Yu was frightened today. Shen Yu shook his head, but his body trembled more and more violently, revealing his true emotions. Yu was very powerful today. Shang Junlin gently kissed his forehead and held him in his arms. When the body in his arms stopped trembling, he released him. "Wash up first." Soak in hot water and relax. Okay. Shin Yu nodded gently. Shin Yu could not stand the smell of blood. He took off his clothes as fast as he could and soaked in hot water. At this moment, there was no trace of fear on his face. Shang Junlin was called away by the minister. After such a big assassination, Shang Junlin could not be idle. Under the hot steam, Shin Yu slightly closed his eyes. No one could see the coldness in his eyes. Of course, he was not afraid. He had encountered many similar things in his previous life. However, he was not afraid in his previous life. In this life, although he was not favored by Count Jinbei, he had never really faced a life and death situation. He should not be so calm when encountering such a thing. Shin Yu was thinking about who caused this assassination. Did the same assassination happen in his previous life? He did not know. It was easy to make a list of all the suspicious people in his mind. Shang Junlin had been very active during this period of time. Whether it was in the imperial court or outside, people with motives could be found. The water gradually cooled down. Shin Yu stopped thinking. After washing up, Shin Yu changed into clean clothes and went to find Shang Junlin. It's cold outside. Dry your hair first before going out. Mu Shi came in with a dry cloth. His Majesty had specially ordered her to wait outside and inform him if something went wrong. Shin Yu thought about it. It was not good to go out with wet hair. So, he sat down. How is it outside? It had been some time since they came back. A lot of guards came. The entrances and exits of the mountain were all blocked. Without His Majesty's order, no one can leave. Mu Shi said while drying Shin Yu's hair. Where is His Majesty? His Majesty summoned Prime Minister Fong and several other ministers for a meeting. They are just next door. How did the people outside behave? All the ministers were reasonable. They did not make trouble and stayed quietly in their own tents. Some of them were hunting outside. His Majesty also sent people to bring them back. After his hair was almost dry, Eunuch Meng came in with a bowl of medicine. It seems that you are almost done. This is the medicine that His Majesty specially ordered. Please take it. Shin Yu took the medicine and slowly stirred it with a spoon. Because it was soaked in hot water, his face was faintly red. At first glance, his complexion was very good. His Majesty is worried about you, so he specially asked me to come and serve you. If you need anything, just let me know. After Shin Yu drank the medicine, Eunuch Meng hurriedly presented the candied fruits that had been prepared. Shin Yu picked up one and put it into his mouth. Did His Majesty also ask for this? Eunuch Meng nodded. His Majesty knows that you are afraid of bitter food, so he asked me to prepare a lot of candied fruits. Shin Yu ate a few candied fruits and reluctantly suppressed the bitter taste in his mouth. He did not continue. Where is His Majesty now? Is it convenient for me to go and find him? Yes, yes, Eunuch Meng nodded again and again. Please come with me. Eunuch Meng did not go with him today. He heard from the imperial bodyguards that it was very dangerous today. Shang Junlin specially ordered that if Shin Yu was afraid and wanted to find him, he could directly bring people there. Now that Shin Yu wanted to see His Majesty, Eunuch Meng would naturally bring people there. But Eunuch Meng could not tell that Shin Yu was afraid. Shin Yu did not intend to pretend to be afraid. Except for the matter of his rebirth, he felt that there was no need to hide anything from Shang Junlin. Eunuch Meng took Shin Yu to another tent, which was specially used for discussions. There were 2 burly guards standing outside. When they saw Shin Yu, they respectfully saluted. The discussion in the tent had come to an end. When he saw Shin Yu, Shang Junlin waved his hand to indicate that they should leave first. Shang Junlin had also changed his clothes. He was no longer wearing a narrow-sleeved riding suit, but an imperial robe with wide sleeves. With such a thing happening, it was naturally impossible for the hunt to continue. The most important thing right now was to investigate the origins of the assassin and see if there were any other assassins hiding in the mountains. Compared to other things, the safety of the Emperor was the most important. Do you have any clues? We are still investigating. Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's hair on his temples. In the following time, you must stay by Jin's side. Other than those who were caught, there are other assassins. Just in case, Jin will be more at ease if you stay by Jin's side. It was still uncertain whether the assassins had accomplices or not. Some of the assassins who ambushed them in the mountains were killed on the spot, and some were captured alive. Does your Majesty have any thoughts about the origin of these people? There was another question that Shen Yu was also uncertain. Did these people come for your Majesty, or for me? Shang Junlin's heart trembled. They all tacitly agreed that these people came for him, but they never thought that there was another possibility. What if these people came for Shen Yu? Shang Junlin immediately called eunuch Meng. Go find Fang Jun, tell him, Shen doesn't care what method he uses, he must find out from these people who they want to assassinate. Eunuch Meng accepted the order and left. Fang Jun didn't know what Shen Yu had experienced when he was young. Although he didn't understand Shang Junlin's order, he still followed the order to interrogate these people. Your Majesty, we caught a sneaky person. A guard pushed in a tied-up person. Shen Yu glanced at the person. He was dressed as a servant and had an ordinary face. He was forced to kneel on the ground and trembled in fear. Take him to Fang Jun and let him interrogate him properly. Yes. The guard carried the person out. Shang Junlin rubbed his eyebrows in annoyance. With such a big mistake, the official in charge of the inspection couldn't absolve himself from the blame and came to beg for forgiveness. Shang Junlin sat at the head of the table and looked down at the official kneeling on the ground. He didn't speak, and the tent fell into a dead silence. The official kneeled on the ground, his legs couldn't help but tremble, and his back was gradually soaked with cold sweat. You said that when you sent people to inspect the mountain, there was nothing wrong with it. After a long time, the Emperor's ambiguous question came from above. Yes, I dare not lie. Even if I have 10,000 guts, I dare not lie about this matter. Your Majesty, please understand. The official kowtowed again and again. He really didn't dare to lie about this matter. This matter was related to more than his life. If he didn't handle it well, it would implicate his entire family and make him a sinner of the entire family. Tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table, Shang Junlin said in a light voice, I can give you a chance to atone for your crimes. If you can find out how these people quietly avoided all the guards and entered the mountains, I will be lenient. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you. No one expected that there would be an assassination during this autumn hunt. The mountain was not as safe as the palace. The officials began to write letters, hoping that the Emperor could return to the palace as soon as possible. If this assassination was targeted at Your Majesty, they must have been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Shen Yu flipped through the letters handed by the officials. He had to admit that their considerations were reasonable. The palace was indeed safer than the mountain. I haven't encountered this kind of thing for a long time. I thought they had stopped. Shang Junlin sneered. Driven by profit, ambition will never die. This kind of thing could never be stopped. After washing up, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin prepared to sleep. Suddenly, the leader of the Imperial Guards came to report. Eunuch Meng was guarding outside. Seeing the anxious look on the other party's face, he didn't dare to delay and hurriedly reported to the Emperor. Your Majesty, please go and take a look. If there is nothing important, Eunuch Meng won't disturb you at this time. Shen Yu pushed Shang Junlin. Not long after, Shang Junlin walked in with a cold face. Shin Yu sat up. What happened? Shang Junue was rescued. Chapter 161. What? Shin Yu grabbed the blanket and asked, when was he rescued? Today. Shang Junlin's expression softened as he sat on the bed. Today. Shin Yu muttered, could today's assassination be related to King Yu's rescue? Shin Yu's suspicion wasn't without reason. There were many forces with motives, but there weren't many who would rescue King Yu at the same time. Perhaps. I wonder if Fang Jun has found anything. Shang Junlin adjusted the blanket for Shin Yu. King Yu hasn't been imprisoned for a day or two. Aside from the He family, is there anyone else who tried to rescue him? Shin Yu was very concerned about King Yu's matter. Although the development of this life was different from his previous life due to his intervention, no one knew how the story would turn out until the last moment. Shang Junlin shook his head, no. After the prison break failed, I thought that they had given up on it. The imperial exam fraud case came to an end, and the officials involved received their due punishment. Due to King Yu's special identity, Shang Junlin only locked him up and didn't send him to the execution ground like the other officials. The next morning, Shang Junlin summoned the Prime Minister and other officials for a meeting. They all knew a little about King Yu's matter, and their hearts sank when they learned that he was rescued. Did Lord Fang get any results? The Prime Minister asked. First, it was an assassination, and then a prison break. The timing couldn't be more coincidental, and no one felt that it was an accident. It's hard to pry open their mouths. I found out that their target was Your Majesty, but they refused to say anything else. Lord Fang sighed. Those who were arranged to carry out this kind of assassination were mostly men of sacrifice, and it was difficult to get anything out of them. What about the person we caught in the mountains yesterday? Did he say anything? Shang Junlin asked. That person couldn't withstand the torture and revealed a lot of information. He came with Lord Su, and he's Madame Su's servant. He received Madame Su's orders to pass information to Hangzhou City. A few days ago, Madame Su instructed him to deliver a letter to someone from Hangzhou City, and he went to receive the letter yesterday. Fang Jun explained the results of the interrogation. From the results of this subject's interrogation, there is no definite connection between him and the assassin. An official's wife that just came to the capital from another place shouldn't be related to an assassin. But the Prime Minister paused briefly before he voiced out his doubts. His Majesty sent an official to Hangzhou City because of the Su family's daughter. So why would she be communicating with Hangzhou City at this time? What's written in the letter? Shang Junlin tapped his knuckles on the table. That person didn't know the contents of the letter. He couldn't find the person who was supposed to receive the letter, so he wandered around there and was arrested as a suspicious person. I've already sent people to find the person who received the letter according to his description, Fang Jun replied. We trust Minister Fang very much. When Shin Yu woke up, Shang Junlin was not around. Mu Shi heard the noise and came in to serve him. After she went out, Shin Yu found that the palace maids were packing up. His Majesty ordered us to return to the palace in advance, Mu Shi explained. Shin Yu could understand that two major incidents had happened one after the other. The ministers also received the news and began to pack up. We didn't encounter such incidents in the past autumn hunt. I wonder if there are still assassins hiding in the dark. His Majesty has already sent people to search. Last night was peaceful, so it should be fine. I hope it can be confirmed quickly so that we can return as soon as possible. No one wanted to stay in a place where assassins might appear. Shang Junlin gave 3 days. If they still found nothing, the official in charge of this matter could be executed. Compared to the past, this was already lenient. Lorden, who was in charge of checking the safety of Chiua Mountain in advance, wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and personally led people into the mountain to investigate. The atmosphere in the camp was very tense. The people who were called back on the first day didn't know what was going on. After they learned what had happened, they were all shocked and broke out in cold sweat. Assassination was a common occurrence for Shang Junlin, but for many of the young masters of aristocratic families, it was a first. After such an incident, the hunt could no longer continue. Everyone gathered together. Besides being nervous, they could only find something to relieve their emotions. The madams and misses who were close to each other gathered together to chat. The young masters had nothing to do, so they had their eyes on the game. A few days ago, they had hunted a lot of game back, enough for them to eat for more than 10 days. The elders in the family were busy with official business, so they couldn't help. They could only gather in 2s and 3s, make a fire, and roast the food themselves. Shang Junlin was very busy these days. Shen Yu occasionally went with him to discuss official business. Fang Jun was very resourceful. 2 days later, he managed to get some information from those people. According to those people, the purpose of their trip was only to assassinate. The higher-ups gave them an order. Even if they couldn't succeed, they had to create chaos. The more chaos, the better. They also said that they were divided into 2 groups. One group went up the mountain, and the other group stayed in the capital. They didn't know what exactly they were going to do. They waited for several days and finally found a good opportunity to act. When was it? Even without Fang Jun saying it, everyone knew. They didn't have a spy. The Prime Minister hit the nail on the head. Yes, Fang Jun's expression was serious. The spy disguised himself as a servant of a minister and went up the mountain with them. He would report to them every day about the movements on the mountain, mainly the movements of His Majesty and His Highness. As the Emperor, Shang Junlin's every move was widely watched. During the hunt, he wouldn't deliberately hide his whereabouts. It wasn't difficult to find out where he went. Find that person. I want to know if his master knows what he is doing. Shang Junlin said coldly. Regardless of whether the officials who brought him in knew or not, they couldn't completely stay out of it. 2 hours later, Shang Junlin finished dealing with official business and saw Shen Yu outside. What are you doing? Shang Junlin walked over and asked. I'm thinking about who saved Prince Yu. Shen Yu looked back. There was still a trace of confusion in his eyes that hadn't disappeared yet. Shen Yu only told Shang Junlin part of the truth. What he was really thinking about was what happened in his previous life. At this time in his previous life, he followed Prince Yu to his fief, but Prince Yu didn't stay there. In addition, during that time, he was constantly sick and muddle-headed. He didn't know much about the outside world. Now that he thought about it, he couldn't find any useful information. There was even less description about this period of time in the book. It only mentioned Shen Qingran's suffering in the imperial palace. Other than that, there were only a few unimportant words. Fang Jun got some information. Shang Junlin told Shen Yu the information he got. There were 2 groups of people. The group that stayed in the capital was to take the opportunity to kidnap Prince Yu, right? Shen Yu pulled himself back from his thoughts. I think so too. This assassination was actually very well planned. At least before the incident, no one noticed it. The only thing they underestimated was that I was already familiar with all kinds of assassination methods. Even if the hidden dragon guards were to stay somewhere else, I would still have a way to inform them immediately. On the 3rd day, Lorden finally found a way for the assassins to enter the mountain without alerting the guards. He barely managed to save his own life. Under Fang Jun's investigation, the person who secretly passed the information to the assassins was also found. Coincidentally, it was Lord Su's servant. When Lord Su was brought to the emperor, he was completely stunned. He didn't know how he became an accomplice of the assassins. Your Majesty, I am innocent. I really don't know what is going on. Lord Su's forehead was on the ground as tears and snot flowed down his face. Then tell me, did this servant follow you up the mountain? Fang Jun stood at the side and asked. Lord Su turned his head and looked at the servant kneeling beside him. It is true that I brought him here, but I really don't know what he did. Your Majesty, please investigate. Shang Junlin listened to the commotion below and frowned. On the other side, Madame Su had been feeling uneasy ever since Lord Su was called away. She kept pacing back and forth in the tent. The bad premonition in her heart was getting stronger and stronger. The person she sent to collect the information didn't come back. With such a big thing happening, she didn't dare to ask outside. She could only wait for news. A few days had passed and she no longer held on to any hope. That person was most likely dead. She only hoped that the communication with her family hadn't been discovered. After Prince Yu was rescued, he fell into a state of disbelief. He thought that he would stay in prison for the rest of his life. He didn't expect to see the light of day again. He stood in the courtyard in a daze and felt the sunlight on his body. He was still in a daze. Did he really come out? Wasn't it just his imagination? He had once had such a dream. In his dream, he had returned to his fief, raised his arms and shouted loudly. With a single call, he had brought the soldiers who believed in him back to the capital and returned all the pain to Shang Junlin. Then, he woke up from the dream. He was still in the dark and damp prison. He had nothing. Under the huge difference between reality and the dream, he only wanted to drown in the dream and didn't want to wake up. Being rescued this time, was it just a dream he had? Your Highness, quickly pack up. We have to set off. A middle-aged man walked over. Oh, okay. Prince Yu seemed to have recovered from his shock. Where are we going? We have to hide from the Imperial Court's troops. My men have caused some trouble for the Emperor, so we have to make the best use of our time. We will be safe after we pass through Hangzhou City. Why Hangzhou City? There's someone there to receive us. If it wasn't for Prince Yu's bloodline and the orders left behind by that person, they wouldn't have to go through so much trouble to rescue him and even lose so many men. Thinking about the men of sacrifice that were sent to assassinate the emperor, the man felt a pain in his heart. It wasn't easy for him to nurture those men, but more than half of them were lost in this operation. Prince Yu, who was in a daze, didn't notice that these people who rescued him were only respectful to him on the surface. They rushed towards Hangzhou City. After confirming that there were no other assassins on Chiyue Mountain, Shang Junlin ordered them to return to the palace. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin were still in the same carriage. This time, no one said anything. They didn't have the mood to care about these things. The number of guards accompanying them had increased by half. Shen Yu leaned over and rubbed Shang Junlin's furrowed brows. Your Majesty, are you still thinking about Prince Yu? I immediately sent the hidden dragon guards to investigate, but they didn't find any trace of them. I have no clue where they came from. This group of people was hidden in the dark, and the one that Feng Pingqi fished out was only one of the forces. After being locked up in the prison for so long, Prince Yu can't do anything even if he leaves. Those people didn't do anything before, so I thought they had given up. Shen Yu said slowly. Prince Yu is just a title. What they care about is never the person, but the identity he represents. Shang Junlin knew this better than anyone else.